The Wyoming wind hit Evelyn's face like a slap the moment she descended from the passenger car. Dust devils spun across the dirt road that passed for Red Hollow's main street. The platform, if you could call three weathered planks nailed together a platform, groaned under her boots. She clutched her father's old suitcase, the leather cracked and faded, and searched the sparse crowd for a man she'd only seen in a single photograph. Walter Grayson, 42 years old, brown hair, kind eyes, or so his letter had promised. "I am not a romantic man, Miss Carter, but I am honest. I need a wife. You need a fresh start. We can build something decent together if you're willing to work." She'd read that letter so many times the paper had gone soft as fabric. But Walter Grayson wasn't there. Instead, a man in a dust-covered coat stood near the station house, hat pulled low, holding something wrapped in cloth. He didn't move toward her, didn't wave, just watched with an expression Evelyn couldn't read, somewhere between pity and irritation. She walked toward him because there was no one else. "Mr. Grayson?" The man's jaw tightened. Up close, she could see he was younger than Walter's photograph suggested. Maybe 30, maybe less. His face was all sharp angles and sun damage, his eyes the color of a thunderstorm rolling across open prairie. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, disappearing into his hairline. "No, ma'am." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "I'm Rhett Maddox, foreman at Iron Mesa Ranch." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Is Mr. Grayson delayed?" Something flickered across Rhett's face. He glanced away, toward the barren hills beyond town, then back. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" "Where is he?" Rhett removed his hat. His hair was dark, sun-streaked at the ends, too long. "Walter died 4 days ago, took a bad fall from his horse, broke his neck." The words didn't land right. They bounced off Evelyn's understanding like stones skipping across water. She heard them, but they made no sense. "That's not possible." "I'm sorry. His last letter arrived 3 weeks ago. He was fine." "Accidents happen out here, ma'am." The suitcase slipped from Evelyn's grip and hit the platform with a thud that echoed. Her vision blurred at the edges. The train behind her released steam with a hiss that sounded like laughter. She'd sold her mother's pearl necklace to afford the ticket. She'd left her sister's boarding house in Philadelphia after one too many lectures about her situation. She'd endured 2 days of rattling trains and leering fellow passengers and the constant smell of coal smoke because Walter Grayson had promised her something better than slowly suffocating in a city that wanted nothing to do with unmarried women past 20. And now he was dead. "Miss Carter?" Rhett's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You got people back east? Someone you can telegraph?" Evelyn's laugh came out wrong, sharp and bitter. "No." "Friends?" "No." "Money for the return fare?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the answer he already knew written in her threadbare traveling dress and scuffed boots. $8? Maybe 9. Rhett's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a resignation, or maybe just exhaustion. He held out the cloth-wrapped bundle. "Baked this morning. Figured you'd be hungry." Evelyn stared at the offering, fresh bread, still warm. The absurdity of it cut through her shock. "You brought me bread." "Yes, ma'am. My future husband is dead. I'm stranded 1,000 miles from anywhere, and you brought me bread." Seemed better than nothing, despite everything, the grief and terror and crushing humiliation pressing down on her chest. Evelyn laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "You're right. Thank you." She took the bread. Their fingers brushed for just a moment. His hands were scarred, rough, the knuckles swollen like he'd broken them more than once. Behind them, the train whistle screamed, last call for passengers continuing west. "I should let you get back on," Rhett said quietly. "Train's about to leave." Evelyn turned to look at the passenger car. Through the window, she could see the conductor checking his watch. In 90 seconds, that train would pull away. In 3 days, she could be back in Philadelphia, back to her sister's disapproving silence and the pitying looks from neighbors who'd watched her father drink himself to death, and her mother follow 6 months later from what the doctor politely called melancholy. The train lurched forward an inch, testing its brakes. "Where's the ranch?" Evelyn heard herself ask. Rhett blinked. "What?" "Iron Mesa Ranch. Where is it?" "About 8 miles north, but ma'am, take me there." "That's not a good idea." I didn't ask if it was a good idea. Evelyn picked up her suitcase. The train was moving now, slowly building steam. I came 2,000 miles to see this place. The least you can do is show it to me. Rhett's storm-gray eyes searched her face. Nothing there for you now. There's nothing anywhere for me. At least there, I'll know what I almost had. For a long moment, Rhett didn't move. Then he let out a breath that might have been a curse or a prayer. Evelyn couldn't tell which. Wagons this way. Back. The ride to Iron Mesa took 2 hours over roads so rough, Evelyn thought her teeth might shake loose. Rhett didn't talk. He just drove, occasionally clicking his tongue at the horses when they got lazy. The landscape was brutal in its emptiness. Endless brown grass, distant mountains that looked like broken teeth, sky so big it made Evelyn feel like an insect. Twice, they passed abandoned homesteads, their windows like dead eyes. What happened to them? Evelyn asked. Drought, debt, winter. Rhett didn't elaborate. They crested a rise, and Iron Mesa Ranch spread out below them. Evelyn's first thought was that it looked tired. The main house was decent-sized but needed paint. The barn listed slightly to one side. Fence posts leaned at angles. A windmill spun with a rusty squeal that carried across the distance. Maybe 100 head of cattle grazed on land that looked like it could barely feed half that number. This is it, Rhett said flatly. Evelyn searched for something honest. It's struggling. That's one word for it. He drove them down the slope toward the house. As they got closer, Evelyn could see the details Walter's letters had left out. The cracked window panes patched with oilcloth, the sagging porch steps, the way the whole place seemed to be slowly surrendering to the landscape. 3 men emerged from the barn. Cowboys, clearly, all lean and sun-hardened. They watched the wagon approach with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Rhett pulled the horses to a stop. Wait here. He climbed down and walked over to the men. Evelyn couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see their body language: surprise, confusion, anger. One of them, a red-headed man with a vicious-looking scar down his cheek, kept gesturing toward Evelyn while his voice rose. Finally, Rhett said something sharp enough that the redhead shut up. The foreman walked back to the wagon, his jaw tight. They'll get your bag. Come on. The inside of the house was better than the outside, but not by much. The furniture was solid but worn. The kitchen showed signs of bachelor living, dishes stacked haphazardly, a pot of something that might have been stew 3 days ago sitting on the stove. But it was clean, mostly, and the bones of something good showed through. Walter built this place 12 years ago, Rhett said, moving through the space like he was giving a tour he didn't want to give. He was planning to expand once the railroad came through. That's the front room. Bedroom through there. Office in the back. Kitchen where we're standing. Evelyn set down her suitcase. How did you know him? Worked for him 6 years. Were you friends? Rhett's expression closed off. He was a good man. Fair. Didn't cheat anyone. He paused. You should know, the funeral was yesterday. We buried him up on the rise behind the property. There's a marker. Something in Evelyn's chest cracked a little more. She'd never even seen Walter's face except in that one faded photograph. I'd like to visit it before I go. I can take you tomorrow morning. Thank you. An awkward silence stretched between them. Somewhere outside, men shouted and cattle lowed. The windmill kept up its rusty shriek. I should get back to work, Rhett said finally. You can stay the night? I'll drive you back to town in the morning, help you sort out passage east. That's very kind. Rhett nodded and turned to leave. Mr. Maddox? He stopped, hand on the door frame. What happens to this place now? Without Walter? Rhett's shoulders tensed. Gets sold, most likely. Bank holds the deed until the estate's settled. Could be weeks. Could be months. And you? I'll find work somewhere else. Boys, too. He said it like it was no big thing, but Evelyn heard the tension underneath. Don't worry about us. We've been through worse. He left before she could respond. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen of a dead man's house, holding a piece of bread given to her by a scarred cowboy who looked at her like she was another problem to solve. Through the window, she could see the endless brown expanse of Wyoming territory, and she wondered, not for the first time that day, if she'd made a terrible mistake coming here. But as the sun began its slow descent toward the jagged mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, Evelyn felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile for a place like this, but maybe defiance. She unwrapped the bread Rhett had given her and tore off a piece. It was good, dense and hearty, the kind of food meant to sustain rather than delight. She ate it slowly, methodically, while her mind raced through calculations. $8. Maybe $9. Not enough to get home. Not enough to start over somewhere else. Barely enough to eat for a week. She could beg her sister to wire money. Could telegraph and admit defeat. Could go back to Philadelphia and spend the rest of her life being poor Evelyn, who thought she could escape to the frontier. Or Evelyn walked to the window and looked out at Iron Mesa Ranch, this broken, struggling, half-dead place that Walter Grayson had built with his own hands and bet his future on. I am not a romantic man, Miss Carter, but I am honest. I need a wife. You need a fresh start. We can build something decent together if you're willing to work. Walter was dead. The promise was broken, but the work remained, and Evelyn had always been good at working. She found Rhett an hour later in the barn, examining a horse's leg. The animal stood patiently while the foreman ran his scarred hands down its foreleg, probing for injury. Pulled muscle, he muttered. You're done for the week, girl. He straightened and saw Evelyn standing in the doorway. His expression shifted to wary. Something wrong with the house? No, I wanted to talk to you about the ranch. Nothing to talk about. You said it would be sold. That's right. To who? Rhett pulled off his gloves and tucked them in his belt. Whoever bids highest, I expect. Maybe Silas Mercer. He's been trying to buy Walter out for 2 years. Why didn't Walter sell? Because Mercer's a snake, and Walter wasn't desperate enough to deal with snakes. Rhett's voice had an edge now. Look, Miss Carter, I know you had a long trip, and this isn't how you wanted things to turn out, but poking around in ranch business isn't going to... I want to see the books. Rhett stopped. What? The account books. Ledgers. Whatever records Walter kept. Evelyn stepped further into the barn, her skirts dragging in the dirt. Before I leave, I want to understand what kind of operation this was. Why? Curiosity. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now. They stared at each other. Evelyn saw the moment Rhett decided she was more trouble than she was worth. Fine. They're in the office. Help yourself. He turned back to the horse. Just don't mess anything up. Evelyn didn't respond. She walked back to the house, found the office, a small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a single window, and started pulling out ledgers. What she found was a disaster. Walter Grayson had been many things, apparently, but an organized record keeper wasn't one of them. Receipts were shoved loose between pages. Dates didn't match. Income and expenses were tracked in 3 different notebooks with no clear system. Some transactions were recorded in full sentences, others in cryptic abbreviations that meant nothing to her. But Evelyn had kept her father's books for 3 years before he drank away the last of their money. She knew how to find patterns in chaos. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, barely noticing when the light changed and the house grew cold. She lit a lamp, made notes, cross-referenced what little organization existed, and slowly, a picture emerged. Iron Mesa Ranch should have been profitable. The cattle prices were decent. The grazing land, while stressed by drought, could still support the herd with proper management. Walter had been making payments on the mortgage, never late. But money kept disappearing. $50 here, $30 there. Small amounts that added up to hundreds over the course of a year, all marked as supplies or repairs with no documentation. And then there were the loans, short-term notes to cover gaps, all borrowed from someone named T. Marsh at interest rates that made Evelyn's stomach turn. She was still staring at the numbers when Rhett knocked on the doorframe. Supper's on. Evelyn looked up. Outside the window, full dark had fallen. Her neck ached from hunching over the desk. Who's T. Marsh? Rhett's expression hardened. Why? Walter borrowed $600 from him over the past 18 months, at 12% interest. Closer to 15, actually. That's usury. That's the frontier. Rhett leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Thomas Marsh runs the general store in Red Hollow. He's also Silas Mercer's brother-in-law. And before you ask, yes, that's why Walter ended up borrowing from him. No one else would lend to the ranch after Mercer spread word we were overextended. Were you? No, we were tight but solid. Until the loans. Evelyn looked back down at the ledgers. These expenses don't make sense. Walter was paying for supplies that don't show up in inventory, repairs that no one seems to remember making. You figured that out in one afternoon? I'm good with numbers. Evelyn stood, her back cracking. Mr. Maddox, I think someone was stealing from this ranch. Rhett didn't look surprised. He looked tired. I know. You know? Suspected. Couldn't prove it. Walter wouldn't hear it anyway. He trusted people too much. Rhett pushed off from the doorframe. But it doesn't matter now. Ranch is going to auction, someone's going to buy it, and whatever thief was bleeding us dry will be someone else's problem. Unless the thief was working for whoever wants to buy the ranch. The silence that followed was heavy. You think Mercer set this up, Rhett said slowly. I think it's possible. You've been here 6 hours, and I can read a ledger. Can you? Rhett's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Even if you're right, what are we supposed to do about it? We got no proof. No sheriff's going to investigate, and Mercer owns half the county. Then we find proof. We? Evelyn met his storm-gray eyes. I'm not leaving tomorrow. Miss Carter, I'm not leaving, she repeated, harder this time. I sold everything I had to come here. I burned every bridge. I have nowhere to go and no way to get there, even if I did. So I'm staying. To do what? Play detective? To work. That's what Walter wanted, wasn't it? Someone willing to work. Evelyn gestured at the chaos of papers spread across the desk. This place is falling apart from the inside. Your books are a mess. You're hemorrhaging money you don't have. And someone, maybe Mercer, maybe someone else, is planning to take everything Walter built. So what? You're going to save it? Rhett's voice dripped skepticism. Maybe. I don't know yet. Evelyn crossed her arms, matching his posture. But I'm going to try, because I've got nothing else to do and nothing left to lose. Rhett stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You're crazy. Probably. This isn't some adventure story. This is real. It's hard. And it's dangerous if Mercer is involved. I know. You'll hate it inside a week. Maybe. I'm not responsible for you. I'm not asking you to be. They faced each other across the cluttered office like duelists. Evelyn could see Rhett weighing his options. Kick her out, let her stay. Try to talk sense into her. She saw the moment he gave up on the last option. Fine. You want to stay, stay. But you work. No special treatment because you're a woman. You pull your weight or you're gone. Agreed. And if Mercer or anyone else comes around causing trouble, you do exactly what I say. No arguments. Agreed. And for the love of... Rhett stopped himself. You sleep in the main house. Alone. Door locked. I don't need the boys getting ideas or starting talk. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Will they? Some of them aren't happy about you being here at all. Cole especially. That's the redhead you saw earlier. He thinks you're bad luck. Thinks women on ranches always mean trouble. What do you think? Rhett's expression was unreadable. I think you're either the bravest person I've met or the most foolish. Haven't decided which yet. Can't I be both? The corner of Rhett's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Yeah, probably. He turned to leave, then stopped. Supper's getting cold. You coming? Evelyn looked down at the ledgers, then back up at Rhett. Yes. She followed him out of the office, through the house, and into the cold Wyoming night. The bunkhouse glowed with lamplight, and the smell of fried meat drifted across the yard. Inside, she could hear men's voices. Rough, tired, wary. This was insane. She knew that. She was a city woman from Philadelphia, stepping into a world she didn't understand, surrounded by men who didn't want her there, trying to solve a mystery that could get her killed. But as Rhett opened the bunkhouse door and the cowboys fell silent, all eyes turning toward her, Evelyn Carter felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt alive. Boys, Rhett said into the silence, Miss Carter's staying on for a while. She'll be helping with the accounts in the house. You treat her with respect, or you answer to me. Clear? Silence. I said, "Is that clear?" A reluctant chorus of "Yes, sir" rippled through the room. Evelyn stepped inside. 8 faces stared back at her, some curious, some hostile, some carefully neutral. The redhead Cole looked like he wanted to spit. "I know this is strange," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. "I know you didn't expect me, but I'm here, and I'm staying, and I'm going to do everything I can to help this ranch survive. I hope we can work together." More silence. Then an older man with a gray beard nodded slowly. "Name's Pete. Been here longest aside from Rhett. You need anything, you let me know." "Thank you." Another man, younger, with a shy smile. "I'm Danny. Welcome, Miss Carter." One by one, most of them introduced themselves. Not warmly, exactly, but not with open hostility either. They were reserving judgment, seeing if she'd break. Only Cole refused to speak. He just stared at her with flat, angry eyes until Rhett cleared his throat meaningfully. Then he turned away and went back to his food. Evelyn sat where Pete indicated, at the end of the long table, as far from the men as the space allowed, and accepted a plate of fried pork and beans. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and plentiful. She ate in silence while conversation slowly resumed around her. The men talked about cattle, about fences needing repair, about weather coming in from the north. They didn't talk to her exactly, but they didn't pretend she wasn't there either. It was a start. After supper, Rhett walked her back to the main house. The moon was nearly full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. "You did okay in there," he said. "They hate me. Some do, some don't. Most are just waiting to see what happens." He stopped at the porch steps. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard." "Tomorrow?" "If you're staying, you're working. We ride out at dawn to check the north fence. You can handle a horse, I assume?" Evelyn thought about the 3 riding lessons she'd taken as a girl in a Philadelphia park. "Of course." Rhett's look said he didn't believe her, but he didn't push. "Dawn, Miss Carter. Evelyn, if I'm staying, you should call me Evelyn." "Dawn. Evelyn." He touched his hat and walked back toward the bunkhouse, leaving her alone on the porch of a dead man's house on the edge of the world. Evelyn went inside, locked the door like Rhett had ordered, and stood in the dark kitchen for a long moment. She could still smell the bread he'd given her that morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. She'd come to Wyoming to marry a stranger and start a new life. The stranger was dead, but maybe, just maybe, the new life was still possible, if she was brave enough to take it, and foolish enough not to run. Evelyn Carter climbed into Walter Grayson's bed, her bed now, she supposed, at least for tonight, and listened to the wind howl across the empty plains. Tomorrow she would learn just how hard this life really was. Tonight, she let herself believe she could survive it. Dawn came too early and too cold. Evelyn woke to someone pounding on the front door hard enough to rattle the hinges. "Miss Carter, sun's up!" She dragged herself out of bed, every muscle protesting. The room was freezing. She'd forgotten to tend the fire before sleeping, and now frost crusted the inside of the window. Her breath came out in clouds. "Coming!" Her voice cracked. She dressed quickly in the dim light, fumbling with buttons her numb fingers barely felt. The traveling dress wouldn't work for riding, but it was all she had. She'd have to make do. When she opened the door, Rhett was already walking back toward the barn, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He didn't wait for her. Evelyn grabbed the shawl she'd hung by the door and hurried after him, her boots slipping on ground so cold it rang like iron. The sky was just beginning to lighten, deep purple, bleeding into gray. In the bunkhouse, lamplight still glowed. The men would be finishing breakfast. She'd missed breakfast. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she didn't dare ask if there was food. She'd told Rhett she could handle this. Complaining on the first morning would prove every doubt right. Inside the barn, Rhett was already saddling a roan mare. Another horse, a large bay gelding, stood cross-tied, waiting. "That one's yours," Rhett said without looking up. "Name's Copper. He's old and mean, but he won't throw you unless you do something stupid." Evelyn approached the horse slowly. Copper turned his head to look at her with one dark, unimpressed eye. He was enormous up close, easily 16 hands, with hooves the size of dinner plates. "I'll need help with the saddle." Rhett glanced over. His expression said he'd expected as much. He finished cinching his own horse's girth and came over. You lied about handling horses. I didn't lie. I've ridden before. In a city park, I'd wager. 3 times, maybe 4. Jesus Christ. Rhett pulled a saddle off the rack. You got any idea how dangerous it is to ride out here if you don't know what you're doing? I'll learn. You could break your neck. Then teach me not to. Rhett stared at her for a long moment, jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't say out loud. Finally, he shook his head and hefted the saddle onto Copper's back. Watch. I'm only showing you once. He walked her through it, how to position the saddle, how to thread the cinch, how to check that everything was secure. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and Evelyn tried to memorize every movement. Too loose, and the saddle shifts. You fall. Too tight, and the horse can't breathe proper. He bolts. You fall. Rhett tested the girth one more time. Either way, you're eating dirt. Understood. Can you mount by yourself? Evelyn looked at the stirrup, which hung level with her chest. Probably not. Rhett laced his fingers together and bent down. Foot here. I'll boost you. She stepped into his cupped hands and he lifted her up with easy strength. She managed to swing her leg over, not gracefully, her skirts tangling, and landed hard in the saddle. Copper's ears flicked back, but he didn't move. Reins in your left hand. Right hand on the horn if you need balance. Heels down, toes up. Squeeze to go, pull to stop. Don't jerk his mouth or he'll make you regret it. That's all? That'll keep you alive for now. Rhett mounted his own horse in one smooth motion. We're checking fence line up north, about 3 miles out. Ground's rough. You fall behind, you yell. You fall off, you yell louder. Don't try to be tough. Understood? Understood. Let's go. He nudged his mare into a walk and headed out of the barn. Evelyn squeezed her legs the way he'd shown her. Copper sighed, and followed, like this was a tremendous imposition. They rode out as the sun finally broke over the eastern horizon, turning the frost-covered grass into a field of diamonds. The temperature hadn't improved, and Evelyn's fingers were numb inside her thin gloves within minutes. Her thighs already ached from gripping the saddle. Rhett rode ahead, not talking. The only sounds were hoofbeats, the creak of leather, and the wind that never seemed to stop. After 20 minutes, Evelyn couldn't feel her face. After 30, her back started cramping. After 45, she understood why Walter's letters had talked about the frontier breaking people. They reached the fence line just as full morning light spilled across the land. Rhett dismounted and walked along the wire, testing posts, checking for damage. Evelyn stayed on Copper, afraid that if she got down, she'd never get back up. This section's shot, Rhett called. He pulled on a post and it came up out of the frozen ground like a rotten tooth. Whole thing needs replacing. Can you do that today? Not alone. Need at least 3 men and half a day's work. He moved down the line, his breath steaming. Add it to the list. What list? The list of everything that's falling apart. Rhett glanced back at her. You warm enough? I'm fine. You're shivering so hard I can hear your teeth. I said I'm fine. Rhett walked back to his horse and pulled something from his saddlebag, a flask. He brought it over to Evelyn. Drink. Just a sip. I don't... It's coffee, not whiskey. Drink. She took the flask with stiff fingers and sipped. The coffee was lukewarm and bitter, and the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. Heat spread down her throat into her chest. Thank you. Rhett took the flask back. You should have said something. No shame in being cold your first time out. I didn't want to complain. Freezing to death isn't brave, it's just stupid. He capped the flask. We'll head back different way. I want to check the south water tank. The ride to the water tank took another hour. By the time they arrived, Evelyn had lost all feeling below her knees. The tank was a large wooden structure fed by a windmill, half frozen and coated in ice. Rhett dismounted and walked around it, frowning. He knelt down and ran his hand along the base. When he stood, his expression was dark. What's wrong? Seems leaking. Has been for a while, looks like. He pointed to water stains on the wood. Loses maybe 10 gallons a day. In summer, that's the difference between cattle drinking and cattle dying. Can you fix it? Can. Question is whether it's worth fixing if we're losing the ranch anyway. Rhett pulled off his gloves and rubbed his face. Everything Walter built is just falling apart, faster than I can patch it. Evelyn heard something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not anger, grief. How long did you work for him? 6 years, like I said. Why? Rhett looked up at her, surprised by the question. Why what? Why stay? Cowboys move around. You could have worked anywhere. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Walter took me on when no one else would. I'd had some trouble down in Colorado, made enemies, needed to disappear for a while. He paused. He never asked what I'd done, never held it over me, just said if I worked hard and stayed honest, past was past. Were you? Honest? With him, yeah, with everything else. Rhett's mouth twisted. I'm still working on that part. What kind of trouble? The kind that gets men killed. He said it flatly, like it was a fact, not a threat. I'm not a good man, Miss Carter. Evelyn. I've done things I'm not proud of, but Walter was good, and he deserved better than what he got. Before Evelyn could respond, a sound rolled across the prairie. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast. Rhett's hand went to his hip, where Evelyn realized for the first time he wore a gun. Get behind the tank. What? Now. The command in his voice left no room for argument. Evelyn dismounted, nearly fell, her legs were so stiff, and stumbled behind the water tank. Rhett positioned himself between her and the approaching riders, his hand still near his weapon. 4 men crested the rise, all on good horses, all dressed better than any cowboy Evelyn had seen. The man in front was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of confident posture that came from never being told no. Rhett's jaw clenched. Mercer. So this was Silas Mercer, the land baron, the snake Walter had refused to sell to. Mercer reined in his horse 20 feet away, smiling like they were old friends. Maddox, didn't expect to find you out here. It's my ranch to work. I go where I'm needed. Not your ranch, though, is it? Not anymore. Mercer's smile didn't waver. Shame about Walter. Good man. Tragic accident. Nothing tragic about a saddle strap breaking. These things happen on the frontier. Funny how they seem to happen to people who stand in your way. The smile finally faded. Careful, Maddox. That sounds like an accusation. Just an observation. The 3 men with Mercer shifted in their saddles. They all wore guns low on their hips, working guns, not for show. Evelyn felt her pulse jump. Mercer's gaze moved past Rhett and found Evelyn. His eyebrows rose. And who might this be? None of your concern. Everything on this land is my concern. I'll own it soon enough. Mercer nudged his horse forward. Rhett moved to block him, hand hovering over his gun. Mercer stopped. Easy, boy. Just being neighborly. Ma'am, I'm Silas Mercer. I own most of the land from here to Red Hollow. Are you family of Walters? Evelyn stepped out from behind the tank. She saw Rhett tense, but she kept moving until she stood beside him. Evelyn Carter. I was engaged to Mr. Grayson. Ah. Mercer's expression shifted to something approximating sympathy. I'm very sorry for your loss. Must have been quite a shock coming all this way. It was. And now you're staying. For the time being. That's unwise, Miss Carter. This is hard country, not suitable for a woman of breeding. His tone was gentle, concerned, but his eyes were calculating. When the estate settles and the ranch goes to auction, you'll want to be far away. Things can get unpleasant during these transitions. Is that a threat? Rhett's voice was quiet and dangerous. It's friendly advice. Mercer turned his attention back to Evelyn. I'm prepared to make you an offer, Miss Carter. I'll cover your passage back east plus $500 for your trouble. That's generous considering you have no legal claim here. $500. More money than Evelyn had seen in 2 years, enough to start over anywhere she wanted. That is generous, she said slowly, but I'm not interested. Mercer's mask of friendliness cracked slightly. Think carefully. This ranch is going to auction whether you like it or not. The bank won't wait forever, and when that happens, I intend to buy it. You could walk away with something now or walk away with nothing later. I'll take my chances. Miss Carter, she gave you her answer, Rhett interrupted. Now get off this land before I make you leave. The 3 hired guns all tensed. For a moment, Evelyn thought she was about to see men kill each other over words. The air felt charged, like lightning was about to strike. Then Mercer laughed, a cold, amused sound. Still playing hero, Maddox? That didn't work out so well for you in Colorado, as I recall. Rhett's face went pale with rage. Yes, I know about that. I know about all of it. Mercer's smile returned, sharp as a knife. You really think you can stop me? You're just a foreman, a nobody, and she's just some desperate woman with no money and no prospects. He gathered his reins. The ranch is mine. It's always been mine. Walter was just too stubborn to admit it. Don't make the same mistake. He turned his horse and rode off. The three gunmen followed, one of them glancing back with a look that promised violence. Rhett stood frozen, his hand still near his weapon, until they disappeared over the rise. Then he let out a breath and his whole body sagged slightly. Are you all right? Evelyn asked. Fine. What did he mean about Colorado? Nothing. Old business. Rhett walked to his horse and started checking the saddle with sharp, angry movements. We're going back. Now. Rhett, I said we're going. He mounted without offering to help her. You wanted to stay? Fine. You're staying, but you need to understand what that means. Mercer's not going to stop. He's going to push and threaten and make life hell until we give up or he gets what he wants. That's how he works. Then we push back. With what? Good intentions? Rhett's laugh was bitter. We got no money, no influence, no friends in high places. He's got all three, plus hired guns who'll do whatever he pays them to do. Evelyn walked over to Copper and tried to mount. Failed. Tried again. Failed again, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Rhett watched her struggle for a moment, then sighed and dismounted. Here. He lifted her into the saddle the same way as before, his hands firm and impersonal. When she was settled, he looked up at her. You're going to get hurt if you stay. Maybe worse. You understand that? Yes. And you still want to do this? I don't have anywhere else to go, remember? That's not a good enough reason to die. Then give me a better one. Evelyn met his storm-gray eyes. Tell me Walter was worth fighting for. Tell me this ranch matters. Tell me there's something here worth saving. Rhett stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away and mounted his own horse. Let's go. They rode back in silence. The afternoon was spent in Walter's office, and Evelyn threw herself into the account books with something close to desperation. She needed to understand the full scope of the damage, needed to find something, anything, that might help them fight back. The numbers told a grim story. Iron Mesa Ranch was drowning in debt. Between the mortgage, the loans from Thomas Marsh, and the mysterious bleeding of funds, they were maybe 3 months from complete collapse. And that was assuming no more disasters hit. Evelyn made lists, debts owed, assets available, monthly expenses, income from cattle sales. She reorganized the files, created a proper ledger system, tracked every dollar she could find. And the more she worked, the more certain she became that someone had been systematically destroying this ranch from the inside. She was still working when someone knocked on the doorframe. She looked up to find Pete, the older cowboy with the gray beard. Supper's on, Miss Carter. Thank you. I'll be there in a moment. Pete didn't leave. He stood there, turning his hat in his hands, clearly wanting to say something. Is something wrong? Evelyn asked. That depends. Is it true Mercer came out here today? Yes. He and Rhett had words. Pete's weathered face creased with worry. That's bad. Real bad. Mercer don't make threats lightly. Rhett handled it. This time maybe. But Mercer's got a long reach and a longer memory. Pete hesitated. Miss Carter, I don't mean disrespect, but you should know what you're walking into. Mercer's wanted this land for years. He tried to buy it legal first. When Walter wouldn't sell, things started going wrong. Cattle disappeared. Fences got cut. Our best water source got poisoned. Poisoned? Dead coyote in the spring. Could have been natural. Could have been not. Pete shrugged. We couldn't prove nothing. Sheriff said it was bad luck. But then the loans started coming due and supplies went missing, and Walter, well, Walter's dead now. The implication hung in the air between them. You think Mercer killed him? I think Walter's saddle strap didn't break on its own. I think someone tampered with it the night before that ride, and I think whoever did it is still out there. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Does Rhett know this? Rhett suspects, can't prove it any more than I can. Pete put his hat back on. I'm telling you this because you seem like a decent woman, and you deserve to know what kind of fight you've picked. Mercer doesn't just want this ranch. He needs it. The railroad's coming through in 6 months, and whoever owns this land when that happens is going to be rich. That's worth killing for, to a man like him. Then we need to make sure he doesn't get it. Pete studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Walter chose you for his wife. Never met you, but he must have seen something in those letters you wrote. Something strong. He turned to leave, then paused. You should eat. Going to need your strength. After he left, Evelyn sat in the growing darkness, her mind racing. The railroad. That changed everything. No wonder Mercer was so determined. This wasn't just about pride or expanding his holdings. This was about a fortune, which meant he'd stop at nothing to take it. She found Rhett after supper in the barn, checking on the horses. He was brushing down his mare with long, methodical strokes, his expression distant. Pete told me about the railroad, Evelyn said. Rhett didn't stop brushing. Figured someone would. Why didn't you mention it? Didn't seem relevant. We're losing the ranch either way. It's relevant because it explains why Mercer's so desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. They also make bodies. Rhett finally looked at her. Evelyn, I know you're smart. I know you're trying to help, but you're thinking like this is a business problem. It's not. It's a survival problem. Mercer's killed before. He'll kill again. And no amount of clever bookkeeping is going to stop him. Then what will? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. I've been trying to figure that out for months. Best answer I got is nothing. Some fights you can't win. I don't believe that. Then you're naive. The word stung, but Evelyn pushed past it. What did Mercer mean about Colorado? What happened there? Rhett's jaw clenched. That's none of your business. If we're going to work together... We're not working together. You're doing the books. I'm running the ranch. That's it. He set down the brush and faced her fully. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I do. But don't mistake me for a good man just because I'm standing against Mercer. I've done bad things, hurt people, and if I thought it would save this ranch, I'd do worse. Would you kill him? The question hung between them. Rhett didn't answer right away. If it came to that, he said finally, yes, I'd kill him. And then I'd hang for it, because Mercer owns the law in 3 counties. So that's not a solution. That's just trading one death for another. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. There has to be another way. If you find it, let me know. Rhett picked up a saddle and carried it to the tack room. Get some rest. Tomorrow we're moving the herd to the south pasture. You'll want to stay at the house for that one. Why? Because it's the hardest work we do, and you're already barely holding on. He said it matter-of-factly, not cruel. No shame in it. You made it through today. That's more than I expected. He left before she could argue. Evelyn walked back to the house through the cold darkness, her body aching and her mind churning. She was in over her head. She knew that. But she'd meant what she said to Rhett. She had nowhere else to go. And maybe that was a kind of strength. When you had nothing left to lose, you could risk everything. Inside the house, she lit the fire and huddled close to it, trying to drive the cold from her bones. She thought about Walter Grayson, who'd built this place with his own hands. Thought about Rhett, carrying grief he wouldn't show. Thought about Pete and Danny and even hostile Cole, all facing an uncertain future. Thought about Silas Mercer, who believed power and money could take whatever he wanted. She pulled out the ledgers again and started looking for something she'd missed, some clue, some weakness, some way to fight back that didn't end with everyone dead. Hours passed. The fire burned down to coals. Evelyn's eyes ached from reading by lamplight. And then she saw it. A notation in Walter's handwriting, dated 8 months ago. A payment of $200 to someone listed only as JB, Survey. She'd overlooked it before, assuming it was related to the ranch. But now, looking closer, she realized it didn't fit. There was no record of any survey work, no maps, no reports. She flipped back through older ledgers, found another payment to JB 6 months before that. Then another, a year earlier. 3 payments, $600 total, all to someone identified only by initials. Evelyn sat back, her heart racing. This was it. This was the thread she needed to pull. Tomorrow, she'd start asking questions, find out who JB was, what Walter had paid for, whether it was connected to the railroad or the missing money or Walter's death. Tomorrow, she'd start fighting back. The next week passed in a blur of cold mornings, hard work, and growing tension. Evelyn learned to saddle Copper by herself, mostly. She learned which cowboys would help her and which barely tolerated her presence. She learned that her hands could blister and bleed and keep working anyway. She also learned that Rhett had been right about one thing. This life was brutal. The drought had stressed the land worse than she'd understood. Pastures that should have been able to feed the herd were barren. Water sources were running low, and every day seemed to bring a new crisis, a broken fence, a sick cow, equipment that failed at the worst possible moment. But Evelyn also learned something else. She was tougher than she'd thought. When Cole made a crude joke about city women and brothels, she stared him down until he looked away first. When Danny shyly asked if she could help him write a letter to a girl back home, she spent an evening teaching him better grammar. When Pete mentioned the men's clothes were falling apart because no one knew how to sew, she organized a mending session and showed them basic repairs. Slowly, grudgingly, she was becoming part of Iron Mesa Ranch. And Rhett noticed. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she couldn't see. Not with hostility anymore, something else. Something that made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fear. They didn't talk much. Rhett wasn't a man who wasted words. But sometimes, at the end of a long day, he'd bring her coffee without being asked, or check that she'd eaten, or mention casually that she'd done good work. It wasn't much, but it was something. 8 days after her confrontation with Mercer, Evelyn rode into Red Hollow with Pete. She needed supplies, and Pete needed to pick up a package at the general store. Rhett had forbidden her from going alone. Red Hollow looked even grimmer in daylight than it had the day she'd arrived. The main street was mostly mud. Half the buildings were boarded up. The people who remained looked tired and suspicious. Pete tied the horses outside the general store and followed Evelyn inside. The store was dim and cramped, smelling of leather and tobacco and something sour. Behind the counter stood a thin man with nervous hands. Thomas Marsh, Evelyn assumed, Mercer's brother-in-law, the man who'd loaned Walter into debt. "Help you?" Marsh's tone was wary. "I need flour, sugar, coffee, and salt," Evelyn said. "Also thread and needles if you have them." "That's a lot. You planning to pay cash?" "Put it on the ranch account." Marsh's expression hardened. "There is no ranch account. Not anymore. Walter Grayson's dead and the estate's in settlement. I need payment up front." Pete stepped forward. "Now hold on. We've been doing business here for 12 years, and you owe me $800 in back payments. You really think I'm extending more credit?" Marsh crossed his arms. "Cash or nothing." Evelyn felt eyes on her from the few other customers in the store, watching, waiting to see if she'd fold. She pulled out the small leather pouch where she kept what little money she had left. $7. Not enough for everything they needed. Maybe enough for half. "I have $7, she said evenly. "That should cover flour, coffee, and salt. Flour alone is $3. $3? Pete's voice rose. "Last month it was $1.50. Prices went up. Drought's making everything scarce." Marsh's smile was thin. "Take it or leave it." Evelyn understood then. This was another attack. Marsh was cutting off their supplies, driving them into the ground faster. Probably on Mercer's orders. She was calculating whether they could make do with just coffee and salt when the door opened behind them. She turned and felt her stomach drop. Silas Mercer walked in, flanked by 2 of his hired guns. "Thomas," Mercer said pleasantly, "I hope you're not giving these good people trouble." Marsh's nervous hands twisted. "No trouble, just business." "Of course, business." Mercer's gaze landed on Evelyn. "Miss Carter, surprised to see you still here. I'd have thought you'd taken my offer by now." "I'm not interested in your offer." "That's unfortunate. Life's getting harder for Iron Mesa, I hear. Supplies running low, money tight." He smiled. "Must be difficult trying to run a ranch with no experience and no resources." "We're managing. For now." Mercer walked past her to the counter, pulling out a money clip thick with bills. "Thomas, whatever Miss Carter needs, put it on my account. Consider it a gesture of goodwill." "We don't need your charity," Pete said. "It's not charity. It's neighborliness." Mercer counted out several bills and laid them on the counter. "A woman shouldn't have to worry about money in hard times, especially not one who's already suffered so much loss." "Keep your money," Evelyn said. "We'll pay our own way." "With what?" Your last $7? Mercer's tone was gentle, pitying. Pride's admirable, Miss Carter, but it won't feed those cowboys. It won't save that failing ranch. Sooner or later, you'll have to face reality. The reality is you're trying to starve us out because you can't win fairly. The store went quiet. Mercer's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Careful, that sounds like another accusation. It's a fact. Is it? Mercer leaned against the counter, casual. Because from where I stand, Iron Mesa's failing because it was always failing. Walter Grayson made bad decisions, borrowed too much, managed poorly, and now that he's gone, there's no one left who knows how to run a ranch. He paused. Except maybe Rhett Maddox. But we both know his reputation. Man like that, with his history, well, people might wonder if he had something to do with Walter's accident. Pete's hand moved toward his gun. One of Mercer's men moved faster, his own weapon clearing leather. The store erupted into chaos. Someone screamed, someone else ran for the door. Evelyn stepped between Pete and the gunman. Stop! Everyone froze. This is exactly what he wants, Evelyn said, her voice shaking but clear. He wants us to make a mistake. Give him an excuse to call the sheriff, claim we're violent, get us thrown off the land. She looked at Mercer. Isn't that right? Mercer smiled. I simply want what's best for everyone. And what's best is for Iron Mesa to be run by someone who knows what they're doing. When it goes to auction, I'll make sure it's put to good use. We'll see about that. Yes, we will. Mercer tipped his hat. Enjoy your shopping, Miss Carter. I meant what I said. The offer stands. $500 right now to walk away. Think about it. He left, his men following. The tension in the store slowly bled away, replaced by embarrassed silence. Marsh wouldn't meet Evelyn's eyes. I still need payment. Evelyn put her $7 on the counter. Give me what this will buy. Marsh counted it out grudgingly. A small sack of flour, a can of coffee, a few pounds of salt. Not enough. Nowhere near enough. Pete carried the supplies to the wagon while Evelyn stood in the street, trying to calm her racing heart. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. That was brave, Pete said quietly, and stupid. If his man had pulled that trigger, but he didn't. This time. They rode back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, Rhett took one look at the meager supplies and his expression darkened. What happened? Evelyn told him? All of it. The inflated prices, Mercer's appearance, the moment Pete almost drew on a hired gun. By the time she finished, Rhett's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Pete, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Were you really about to pull a gun in the middle of town? In front of witnesses? He was threatening Miss Carter. And if you'd killed him, we'd all hang. You know that, right? That's what Mercer wants. He wants us to make the first move so he can claim self-defense, bring in the law, take everything legally. Rhett turned to Evelyn. And you? What were you thinking, provoking him like that? I was standing up for us. You were painting a target on your back. Mercer's not going to forget that. Good. Let him know we're not backing down. We are backing down, Rhett's voice rose. We have no choice. We're out of money, out of time, and out of options. In a month, maybe less, the bank's going to foreclose. The ranch will go to auction. Mercer will buy it. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. There has to be something. There isn't. Rhett's control finally snapped. I've tried everything. I've worked 18-hour days. I've cut every cost. I've begged for extensions on loans. And we're still sinking. So yes, maybe it's time to back down. Maybe it's time to accept that some fights can't be won. Walter didn't accept that. The words hit Rhett like a physical blow. He stared at her, something broken showing through his anger. Walter's dead, he said quietly, and maybe if he'd been smarter, if he'd seen what was coming, he'd still be alive. He walked away before Evelyn could respond. She stood in the yard surrounded by a ranch that was falling apart and realized she'd made a terrible mistake. Not in staying and assuming she could fix this alone. In thinking determination was enough, Rhett was right. They were out of time. Unless she could find something, anything, to change the game. That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Evelyn returned to Walter's office. She spread out the ledgers again, looking for the payments to JB. 3 of them, spread over 18 months, $600 total. What had Walter bought with that money? And why hide it under just initials? She pulled out every scrap of paper she could find, looking for clues. Old letters, receipts, notes, anything that might explain. And then, tucked between the pages of an old invoice book, she found it. A letter, addressed to Walter Grayson, dated 7 months ago. The handwriting was neat, professional. The signature at the bottom read, J. Blackwood, Surveyor. Evelyn's hand shook as she read, Mr. Grayson, per your request, I have completed a comprehensive survey of your property and the surrounding territory. I can confirm that the railroad's planned route passes directly through the northwest corner of your land. However, my research has uncovered something else of significant interest. Geological samples from your northern pasture show indicators consistent with copper deposits. I recommend further investigation by a mining expert. If my preliminary analysis is correct, the mineral rights to your land may be worth substantially more than the surface value. I will maintain confidentiality per our agreement. Full report enclosed. Evelyn read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each pass. Copper. There was copper under Iron Mesa Ranch, potentially a lot of it. That's what Walter had been hiding. That's what the payments to JB had been for. He'd known the railroad was coming, but he'd also known there might be something even more valuable beneath his feet. And if Evelyn could find that report, prove the copper existed, the ranch wouldn't just be valuable. It would be worth a fortune, worth killing for. Which meant Walter's death suddenly made perfect sense. If Mercer had somehow learned about the copper, he wouldn't have just wanted the ranch. He would have needed it, at any cost. Evelyn sat back, her mind racing. This changed everything, but it also meant she was holding dynamite. If Mercer found out she knew, she carefully folded the letter and hid it inside her bodice, against her skin. Then she went through the rest of Walter's papers with new urgency, looking for the full geological report. She didn't find it, which meant either Walter had hidden it somewhere else or someone had already taken it. Either way, Evelyn now had a weapon. Knowledge that could save Iron Mesa Ranch or get them all killed trying. She had to tell Rhett, but not tonight. Not when tensions were high and everyone was on edge. Tomorrow, when she could present it calmly, strategically, as the solution they desperately needed. Evelyn returned to bed but didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside, and wondered if she'd just found salvation or signed all their death warrants. Morning would tell. Morning came with the smell of smoke. Evelyn woke to shouting and the acrid taste of burning wood in her throat. She stumbled out of bed, still dressed from falling asleep over the ledgers, and ran to the window. The barn was on fire. Flames clawed at the eastern wall, orange and hungry in the pre-dawn darkness. Men were already running toward it with buckets, their shadows dancing in the firelight like demons. She could hear horses screaming inside. Evelyn didn't think. She ran. Outside, the cold air hit her lungs hard. Rhett was organizing the men into a line from the water pump to the barn, passing buckets hand to hand. The fire was spreading faster than they could douse it. "The horses!" Danny was yelling. "They're still inside!" Rhett started toward the barn doors. Pete grabbed his arm. "It's too dangerous!" Rhett shook him off and disappeared into the smoke. Evelyn's heart stopped. She ran to the pump and started working it, filling buckets as fast as her shaking hands could manage. The metal handle was freezing, and within seconds her palms were raw, but she didn't stop. Cole appeared beside her, grabbing buckets as she filled them. For once, his face held no hostility, just fear. "How'd it start?" Evelyn gasped. "Don't know. Pete found it maybe 5 minutes ago." 5 minutes. That's all it had taken for their world to start burning. Rhett emerged from the barn leading 2 panicked horses, their eyes rolling white with terror. He passed them to Danny and went back in. More smoke was pouring out now, thick and black. "Rhett!" Pete shouted. "Get out of there!" But Rhett was already gone, swallowed by the smoke. Seconds stretched. 10, 20, 30. Evelyn stopped pumping. "He's been in too long." "He knows what he's doing," Cole said, but his voice was tight with worry. 40 seconds. 50. Then Rhett stumbled out, coughing violently, leading Copper and 1 other horse. His face was black with soot, his coat smoking. He handed off the horses and bent double, trying to breathe. "That's all of them," he managed between coughs. "Now kill this fire before it spreads to the house." They worked until the sun came up, passing buckets, until Evelyn's arms felt like they'd tear from her shoulders. By the time they got the fire under control, the eastern wall of the barn was gone and half the roof had collapsed. But it could have been worse, much worse. As the last flames died, the men stood in exhausted silence, surveying the damage. Equipment was destroyed, feed stores ruined. The barn would need complete rebuilding, work they didn't have time or money for. Rhett walked along this burned section, his jaw set. He stopped near the base of the destroyed wall and knelt down, examining something in the charred debris. When he stood, he was holding a piece of metal, an oil lamp, crushed and broken. "This was outside the barn," he said quietly, "near the wall where the fire started." Pete moved closer. "You sure?" "I'm sure. I check every lamp before bed. Make sure they're out. This one wasn't in the barn last night." Rhett's voice was flat, dead. "Someone put it there. Someone started this fire." The implications settled over them like ash. Cole spat into the dirt. "Mercer." "Can't prove it," Rhett said. "But yeah, Mercer." Evelyn looked at the destroyed barn, at the exhausted men, at Rhett's soot-covered face, and felt something break inside her. Not despair. Rage. "We need to talk," she said. "Now." Rhett glanced at her. Something in her expression must have registered because he nodded. "Pete, get the boys fed and rested. I want someone watching the property at all times from now on. If anyone sees something suspicious, you come get me." "You think they'll try again?" Danny asked, his young face pale. "I know they will." Evelyn walked back to the house, Rhett following. Inside, she pulled the letter from where she'd hidden it and handed it to him without a word. Rhett read it once, then again. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that might have been hope. "Copper," he said. "There's copper under this land. That's what Walter believed. That's what he paid for. A survey to confirm it. Where's the full report?" "I don't know. I've torn apart his office. If it was there, it's gone now." Rhett sank into a chair, the letter still in his hands. "If this is real, if there really is copper here, then the ranch isn't just valuable. It's worth killing for." Evelyn sat across from him. "And Mercer knows. He has to. That's why he's so desperate. The railroad's just the excuse. The real prize is what's underneath. We still can't prove it." "Not yet. But Jay Blackwood conducted the survey. If we can find him, get him to testify to what he found. That's a big if. Mercer could have already gotten to him. Paid him off or worse." "Maybe. But it's the only chance we have." Evelyn leaned forward. "Rhett, this is it. This is what we need. Proof that this land is worth more than anyone realizes. With that, we can go to the bank, get an extension on the loans. We can go to investors, find buyers who'll outbid Mercer at auction. We can fight back." Rhett was quiet for a long time, staring at the letter. When he finally looked up, his storm gray eyes were haunted. "If we do this, if we go after Mercer directly, people are going to get hurt. Maybe killed. People are already getting hurt. You almost died in that barn. That's different from starting a war." "He started the war when he killed Walter." Evelyn's voice cracked. "We're just finally fighting back." Rhett stood and walked to the window, looking out at the burned barn. His shoulders were tight with tension. "You don't know what you're asking. Mercer's not just powerful. He's ruthless, and I'm not—" He stopped, shook his head. "There are things in my past, things I'm not proud of. If we push Mercer, he'll use all of it against us. He already threatened to." "What happened in Colorado?" The silence stretched so long Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. "I killed a man," Rhett said finally. "He was a rancher's son, rich kid who thought he owned the world. He took something that didn't belong to him, someone who didn't belong to him. A woman named Maria, daughter of one of the ranch hands." His voice was hollow, distant. "I told him to leave her alone. He laughed, said I should know my place. So I beat him. Didn't mean to kill him, but his head hit a fence post wrong, and that was it." Evelyn's breath caught. "What happened?" "His father had money and connections. I had nothing. They were going to hang me for murder, so I ran, changed my name. Ended up here." Rhett turned to face her. "That's who you're trusting with this fight. A man who killed someone and ran from justice. Did he deserve it? The man you killed? Does it matter?" "Yes." Rhett's laugh was bitter. "He'd raped her, Maria. 3 times that we knew of, and everyone just accepted it. Because he had money and she was nobody. He paused. So yeah, he deserved it, but that doesn't make me a good man. Evelyn stood and walked to where Rhett stood. A good man would have looked away, told himself it wasn't his business. You didn't. I killed someone. You protected someone who couldn't protect herself. That's not the same thing. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to help me save this ranch. Can you do that? Rhett stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Where do we start? We find Jay Blackwood, get him to verify what he found, and then we figure out who took that report and why. Blackwood's probably in Cheyenne. That's where most surveyors work out of. 3 days ride, maybe 4. Can you go? Not right now. Not with the barn burned and Mercer's people watching us. I leave. They might make a move on the ranch. Rhett thought for a moment. But I could send Pete. He's trustworthy and he can handle himself if there's trouble. What about me? What about you? I should go too. Pete can protect me, and if we find Blackwood, I can explain the situation better than anyone. I've been through Walter's records. I know what questions to ask. Absolutely not. Why not? Because it's too dangerous. Because Mercer's watching. Because... Rhett stopped, his jaw working. Because if something happened to you, I'd never forgive myself. The admission hung between them, unexpected and raw. Evelyn felt her heart stutter. Nothing's going to happen to me, she said quietly. And we don't have time for careful. If Mercer realizes what we're looking for, he'll get to Blackwood first. Rhett closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were resigned. You're not going to let this go, are you? No. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? I've been told. Despite everything, the fire, the danger, the impossible odds, Rhett's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. Fine. You and Pete leave tomorrow morning, early before anyone notices. Tell the boys you're going to visit family or something. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If this goes wrong, we're all dead anyway. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Pete was briefed on the plan and took it with his usual stoic calm. Evelyn packed light, a change of clothes, what little money remained, the letter from Blackwood. Rhett drew her a map to Cheyenne and wrote down the names of 2 boarding houses where surveyors typically stayed. As evening fell and the men gathered for supper, Cole approached Evelyn on the porch. His scarred face was tight with suspicion. Heard you're leaving tomorrow. Just for a few days. Convenient timing, right after the barn burns. What's that supposed to mean? Cole stepped closer, his voice low and ugly. Means I don't trust you. Never have. You show up right when Walter dies, start poking around in his business, and now things are falling apart faster than ever. Makes a man wonder. Wonder what? Wonder if maybe you're working for Mercer, playing us from the inside. The accusation hit like a slap. Before Evelyn could respond, Rhett's voice cut through the darkness. That's enough, Cole. Cole turned. Rhett stood in the doorway, his expression dangerous. You got something to say, you say it to me. I'm just pointing out... You're pointing out nothing except your own stupidity. Rhett moved between Evelyn and Cole. Miss Carter's done more for this ranch in 2 weeks than you've done in 6 months. She's risked her life, worked herself raw, and never once complained. So if you got a problem with her, you got a problem with me. We clear? Cole's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might actually swing. Then he spat at Rhett's feet and walked away. Don't mind him, Rhett said quietly. He's scared. We all are. He's not wrong to be suspicious. I did show up at a very convenient time. Convenience doesn't mean conspiracy. Rhett looked down at her, his expression softening. You're not working for Mercer. I know that. Hell, half the reason he wants you gone is because you're the one person here who's actually making a difference. I haven't made anything better. The barn's destroyed, we're out of supplies, and everyone's terrified. You found that letter? That's more than I managed in 6 months of trying. Rhett paused. You gave us something I didn't think we had anymore. What's that? A reason to keep fighting. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn became acutely aware of how close they were standing, close enough that she could see the soot still smudged on his jaw, smell the smoke that clung to his clothes. I should go, she said. Early start tomorrow. Yeah. But Rhett didn't move. Be careful in Cheyenne. Trust Pete, but don't trust anyone else. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I will. And Evelyn? His voice dropped. Come back. It wasn't a command. It was something else, something that made her chest tight. I will, she said again, softer this time. She went inside before she could do something foolish like reach for him. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind and the nervous stamping of horses still spooked from the fire, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd said her name. Like it mattered. Like she mattered. Like maybe, against all odds and common sense, they were becoming something more than just allies in a losing battle. Morning came cold and clear. Evelyn met Pete at the barn, what was left of it, before dawn. The old cowboy had 2 horses saddled and supplies packed. He looked her over critically. You sure about this, Miss Carter? No, but we're doing it anyway. That's the spirit. Pete handed her Copper's reins. We ride hard. We can make Wilson's Creek by nightfall. That's halfway. Another day and a half to Cheyenne. They mounted and rode out as the first light touched the eastern sky. Evelyn looked back once and saw Rhett standing in the yard, watching them go. Even at a distance, she could feel his worry. Then they crested the rise, and Iron Mesa Ranch disappeared behind them. The first day passed without incident. They rode through empty country, seeing only distant cattle and the occasional homestead. Pete kept up a steady pace, but wasn't cruel about it, calling rest breaks when he saw Evelyn struggling. You're getting better at this, he said during one stop. A month ago, you could barely sit a horse. Now you ride like you were born to it. I don't feel like it. Nobody does at first. But you got grit. That counts for more than skill sometimes. They reached Wilson's Creek just as darkness fell, a tiny settlement with one building that served as both store and boarding house. The proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Yates, eyed them suspiciously, but accepted Pete's money for a room and stable space. Just you two? She asked, her gaze lingering on Evelyn. My niece, Pete said smoothly, taking her to Cheyenne to visit her aunt. Mrs. Yates didn't look convinced, but she didn't ask more questions. She showed Evelyn to a small room barely big enough for a cot and told her supper was in an hour. The meal was simple but filling, stew and bread. 3 other guests sat in the common room, all men, all watching Evelyn with varying degrees of curiosity. She kept her eyes down and ate quickly. Afterward, in the privacy of her room, she pulled out Blackwood's letter and read it again. The words hadn't changed, but each time she looked at them, the implications grew larger. Copper deposits, mineral rights, a fortune underground. Walter had died for this knowledge, and now Evelyn was betting everything that she could use it to save what he'd built. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It's Pete. She opened the door. The old cowboy looked troubled. What's wrong? Maybe nothing. But one of those men downstairs asked too many questions at supper. Wanted to know where we were from, where we were headed, what business we had in Cheyenne. Pete's weathered face was grim. Could be normal curiosity. Could be someone's following us. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Mercer. If he knows we left, he might have sent someone to see what we're up to. Or we're just being paranoid. Pete shrugged. Either way, we leave before dawn. Before anyone else is awake. All right. And Miss Carter? Keep that letter hidden. If we're being watched, that's what they're after. Evelyn touched her bodice where the letter rested. It doesn't leave my person. Good. Get some sleep. We got a hard ride tomorrow. But sleep wouldn't come. Evelyn lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to footsteps in the hallway outside. Every sound made her tense. Every creak could be someone coming for her. She must have dozed eventually, because Pete's knock startled her awake. The room was still dark. Time to go. They slipped out while the boarding house slept, saddling their horses by moonlight. The air was frigid, their breath clouding. As they rode out of Wilson's Creek, Evelyn looked back and saw lamplight flicker on in one of the upper windows. Someone was awake, watching them leave. Pete, I see it. Ride. They pushed the horses hard, faster than was safe in the darkness. Evelyn clung to Copper's neck, trusting the horse to find his footing. Behind them, she thought she heard other hoofbeats, but it might have been her imagination. Dawn found them miles from Wilson's Creek, following a narrow trail through rocky hills. Pete finally slowed the pace, the horses blowing hard. We lost them, if there was anyone to lose. You think we're safe? I think we're safer than we were. Pete pulled out a canteen and took a long drink. But stay alert. We're not in Cheyenne yet. The second day was harder than the first. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to navigate steep climbs and treacherous descents. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses through sections too dangerous to ride. Evelyn's legs ached, her back screamed. Blisters from the rains had opened and bled, then opened again. But she didn't complain. Couldn't complain, not when so much depended on reaching Cheyenne. They stopped only twice, once to rest the horses, once to choke down some dried beef and hardtack from Pete's supplies. The old cowboy was quieter than usual, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. You really think someone's following us? Evelyn asked. Can't be sure, but my gut says yes. How far to Cheyenne? 4 hours? Maybe 5? We'll get there before dark if we keep moving. They rode in silence after that, pushing through exhaustion. The landscape gradually changed from barren prairie to something more settled. Scattered ranches, then farms, then the first signs of civilization. Cheyenne appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent. After days of empty wilderness, the city seemed impossibly large. Buildings of actual wood and stone, streets with real names, people everywhere. Pete led them to a boarding house on the eastern edge of town, a modest place called Porter's that catered to working men. The proprietor, a tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers, barely glanced at them before accepting payment and handing over a key. 1 room or 2? 2, Pete said. We're not looking for gossip. Don't care if you were. Just need your names for the register. Pete wrote something, probably false names. The proprietor didn't check. Evelyn's room was small but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into sleep, but Pete knocked before she could even remove her boots. We need to move while there's still light. If Blackwood's in town, I want to find him tonight. Now? Now. Before whoever was following us figures out where we're staying. Evelyn forced herself upright. Where do we start? The boarding houses Rhett mentioned, the surveyor offices downtown. Someone will know where Blackwood is. Pete's expression was grave. But we ask careful. Mercer might have people watching for anyone asking about surveys or mineral rights. They went back out into the cooling evening, Evelyn's exhaustion forgotten in the urgency of the hunt. The first boarding house Rhett had mentioned was a bust. The landlady had never heard of J. Blackwood. The second was boarded up, a notice on the door declaring it closed for unpaid debts. Damn, Pete muttered. That leaves the surveyor offices. They found 2 offices still open, both near the territorial building. The first was a cramped room stuffed with maps and instruments, run by an older man who barely looked up from his work. Blackwood? Sure, I know him. Good surveyor. Honest. Evelyn's heart leaped. Is he in Cheyenne? Left about 3 months ago. Said he had family business out California way. Did he leave an address? Any way to contact him? The surveyor finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. Why you asking? He did some work for my late husband, Evelyn said, falling into the lie easily. I'm trying to settle the estate. Need copies of his reports. Your husband got a name? Walter Grayson, Iron Mesa Ranch. Something shifted in the surveyor's expression. Wariness, maybe, or recognition. Can't help you. Don't know where Blackwood went. But you said... I said I can't help. You want to try the Territorial Land Office. They might have records. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got work to finish. He turned back to his maps, dismissing them. Pete touched Evelyn's arm, and they left. Outside, Pete's face was troubled. He knows something. He got nervous when I mentioned Walter's name. Yeah, someone's gotten to him. Warned him not to talk, maybe paid him to forget. Pete looked up and down the street. The land office is closed now. Won't open until morning. We'll have to try then. They walked back to Porter's through streets that grew darker and emptier as night fell. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Inside the boarding house, Pete walked her to her room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. If something happens, you scream loud and run for the street. Understood? You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Pete's weathered face was kind despite the harsh words. We're close to something, Miss Carter. That makes us dangerous to the wrong people. So you be careful tonight. After he left, Evelyn locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. She stood in the center of the small room, her heart racing, and tried to calm herself. They were close. So close. Blackwood had left town, but there had to be records, documents, something that proved what he'd found beneath Iron Mesa Ranch. She just had to survive long enough to find it. Evelyn changed into her nightdress and lay down, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building made her tense. She stared at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as clouds passed over the moon outside. Somewhere around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. They stopped outside her door, the handle turned, slowly, testing the lock. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. She sat frozen, barely breathing, as whoever was outside tried the door again. The lock held. A long silence. Then the footsteps retreated. Evelyn didn't move for what felt like hours. When she finally crept to the door and pressed her ear against it, she heard nothing but the normal sounds of the boarding house settling. But she didn't sleep after that. She sat in the chair she'd wedged against the door, watching the darkness, and waited for dawn. Morning came with Pete's knock. "Miss Carter, you all right in there?" Evelyn moved the chair and unlocked the door. Pete took one look at her face and swore. What happened? She told him about the footsteps, the door handle turning. Pete's expression grew darker with each word. "That's it. We find what we need today and we leave tonight. Don't care if we have to ride all night to put distance between us and whoever's watching. The land office opens at 8. Then we're there at 8. Get dressed. We're not taking chances anymore." They left the boarding house together, Pete's hand never far from his gun. The Territorial Land Office was a solid stone building near the center of town, already busy with clerks and surveyors when they arrived. A young clerk with wire-rimmed glasses greeted them. "Help you folks?" "I need to see survey records for Iron Mesa Ranch," Evelyn said, "located about 8 miles north of Red Hollow. That'll be filed under the original land grant. Take me a few minutes to pull the file. You got documentation proving you have legal standing to view the records?" Evelyn hadn't thought of that. She fumbled for an answer, but Pete stepped in smoothly. "Lady's the widow. Ranch is in probate. She's executor of the estate." "Still need documentation." "We can get that," Evelyn said quickly. "But the surveyor who did the work, Jay Blackwood, we're trying to locate him. Do you have any contact information on file?" The clerk's expression closed off, just like the surveyor's had the night before. "Can't release that information without proper authorization." "Please, it's urgent. Mr. Blackwood did survey work last year that's crucial to settling my husband's estate. I'm sorry, without documentation I can't help you." The clerk's tone was final. "Next in line, please." They were dismissed. Evelyn wanted to argue, but Pete steered her firmly toward the door. Outside, she turned on him. "We were so close. He knew, same as the surveyor last night. Someone's paying people to keep quiet about Blackwood and whatever he found." Pete scanned the street. "Question is, who's doing the paying and how deep does it go?" "Mercer." "Probably, but we can't prove it and we can't force anyone to talk." Pete's jaw was set. "We need a different approach." "Like what?" "Like finding someone Mercer can't buy or scare. Someone who'll talk because it's the right thing to do." Pete thought for a moment. "There's a newspaper here, the Wyoming Tribune. Got a reputation for going after corruption. Maybe if we talk to a reporter and tell them what? That we think there's copper under our ranch, but we can't prove it because the surveyor disappeared and everyone's too scared to talk?" Evelyn shook her head. "They'll think we're crazy." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll think we're on to something. Either way, it's worth a try." They found the Tribune offices 2 blocks away in a shabby building that smelled of ink and tobacco. Inside, 3 men worked at desks piled high with papers. One of them, maybe 30 years old with suspicious eyes and ink-stained cuffs, looked up as they entered. "Help you?" "I hope so," Evelyn said. "My name is Evelyn Carter. This is Pete Walker. We need to talk to someone about a story, about land fraud, and possibly murder." That got his attention. The reporter set down his pen. "I'm listening." The reporter's name was Henry Caldwell, and he listened to their story with the kind of skepticism that came from years of chasing rumors that led nowhere. He took notes in shorthand while Evelyn talked, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, he set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair. That's quite a tale. It's not a tale. It's the truth. Maybe. But truth and proof are different animals. Caldwell tapped his notebook. You've got a letter from a surveyor suggesting there might be copper. You've got a dead rancher and a suspicious barn fire. You've got a powerful man who wants your land. What you don't have is anything that ties it together. That's why we need your help, Pete said. Someone's covering this up, making sure no one talks. A newspaper starts asking questions that might shake something loose. Or it might get me sued for libel. Silas Mercer's got enough lawyers to bury this paper 6 times over. Caldwell picked up the letter Evelyn had placed on his desk, reading it again. J. Blackwood. I know that name. He's got a reputation for being thorough. If he said there's copper, there probably is. Then help us prove it. How? Blackwood's gone, the report's missing, and everyone who might know something is too scared to talk. Caldwell handed the letter back. I believe you, Miss Carter. I do. But belief doesn't make a story I can print. Evelyn felt hope slipping away. So that's it? We just give up? I didn't say that. Caldwell stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. I've been collecting information on Mercer for 3 years. Every rumor, every suspicious land deal, every accident that happened to someone standing in his way. There's a pattern, but it's all circumstantial, nothing solid enough to publish. Why not? Because the first time I print something I can't prove, Mercer sues me and wins. The Tribune goes under and I never work as a reporter again. He dropped the folder on the desk. It made a heavy thud. But if you can find real proof, documentation, testimony from someone who can't be bought, then I'll print it, front page, and I'll make sure every paper in the territory picks it up. We've tried. Everyone's too frightened or paid off. Caldwell was quiet for a moment, thinking. There might be one person, Thomas Marsh, Mercer's brother-in-law. He runs the general store in Red Hollow. We know who he is, Pete said. He's the one bleeding our ranch dry with those loans. Right. But here's something you might not know. Marsh and Mercer had a falling out about 6 months ago. My sources say it was over Marsh's daughter. Mercer made some kind of advance, Marsh objected, and things got ugly. They still work together because Marsh is terrified of what Mercer might do, but there's no love lost between them. Evelyn's mind raced. You think Marsh would testify against him? Not voluntarily, but if he thought he had protection, if he thought Mercer was going down anyway, he might flip, especially if you can promise him immunity from prosecution for his part in the loans. We can't promise that. We're not the law. No, but I know someone who is. Caldwell pulled out a business card and scribbled something on the back. Federal Marshal named Clayton Webb. He's been looking into land fraud in the territory for months. Doesn't have jurisdiction over murders. That's local law. But fraud crosses state lines, which makes it his business. You get Marsh to talk, and Webb might be interested enough to investigate properly. Pete took the card. And if Marsh won't talk, then you're back where you started. Caldwell sat back down. Look, I can't do your work for you, but I can promise you this. If you bring me something solid, I'll make sure everyone knows what Mercer's done. That's the best I can offer. It wasn't enough, but it was more than they'd had before. Outside the Tribune offices, Evelyn turned to Pete. Do you think Marsh will talk? No, but I think if we corner him right, he might slip up. Say something useful. Pete studied the card Caldwell had given them. Marshal Webb's office is 2 blocks over. We should talk to him, see if he's actually interested or if this is another dead end. They found Marshal Webb in a cramped office above a feed store. He was a lean man in his 40s with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. When Pete explained why they were there, Webb listened without interrupting. Silas Mercer, he said when they finished. I've heard that name before, mostly in connection with things I can't prove. Then you believe us? Evelyn asked. I believe Mercer's dirty. I've believed that for a while, but believing and proving are 2 different things. Webb leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. Here's my problem. I'm one marshal covering half the territory. I don't have the manpower to investigate every suspicious land deal. I need to pick my battles, and I need to pick the ones I can win. This is one you can win. Maybe. If you can deliver what you say you can. Thomas Marsh testifying about fraud, documentation about the copper deposits, evidence of sabotage and intimidation. Webb's gaze was hard. But if you're wasting my time, if this is just a property dispute between neighbors, then I'll make sure you regret bringing it to me. It's not a dispute. It's murder. Then prove it. Get me Marsh. Get me something I can use, and I'll do my job. Webb stood, signaling the meeting was over. But you better move fast. Word's going to get back to Mercer that you're in Cheyenne asking questions. When that happens, he's going to make a move. You want to be ready for it. They left Webb's office with more questions than answers. Outside, the afternoon sun was already sliding toward the horizon. They'd been in Cheyenne less than 24 hours, but it felt like weeks. We should head back, Pete said. Tonight, like I said, Rhett needs to know what we found and what we didn't find. We can't go back empty-handed. We're not. We've got the marshal's attention. We've got the reporter ready to print if we bring him proof. That's more than we had. Pete's weathered face was tired. But we can't get that proof here. It's all back in Red Hollow. With Marsh. And with whatever Walter hid that we haven't found yet. Evelyn knew he was right, but the thought of returning without Blackwood or his report felt like failure. They'd risked everything on this trip, and they were going back with nothing but promises and possibilities. They returned to Porter's to gather their things. As Evelyn packed her few belongings, someone knocked on her door. She opened it expecting Pete. Instead, she found a young boy, maybe 12, holding a folded piece of paper. Lady called Evelyn Carter? Yes. Man paid me to give you this. Said it was urgent. The boy thrust the paper at her and ran off before she could ask who the man was. Evelyn unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The message was written in neat block letters. You're asking about the wrong surveyor. Jay Blackwood didn't leave town. He's buried outside it. North Cemetery, unmarked grave, second row from the back fence. Check the death records at the courthouse if you don't believe me. They called it a heart attack, but everyone knows that's a lie. His report is gone, probably burned. But his assistant might have kept copies. Name's Samuel Reed, lives above the dry goods store on 4th Street. Be careful. They're watching you. There was no signature. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read it twice more. Blackwood was dead. Murdered, if this letter was to be believed. And someone knew enough about it to send her a warning. She found Pete in the hallway, showed him the letter. His face went grim. Could be a trap. Or it could be someone trying to help. Either way, we're not going alone. Pete checked his gun. We'll check the courthouse first, verify the death record. If it's real, then we find this Reed fellow, but we do it fast and we do it careful. The courthouse was closing when they arrived, but Pete's urgency convinced a tired clerk to let them check the death records. It took 15 minutes of searching through ledgers before Evelyn found it. Joseph Blackwood died August 14th. Cause of death? Heart failure. Age 41. August. 3 months after he'd written to Walter about the copper deposits. 3 months before Walter's own suspicious death. That's too young for a heart attack, Pete muttered. Man that age doing that kind of work, he'd be healthy. The letter says everyone knows it was a lie. Then let's see if his assistant knows the truth. 4th Street was on the rougher side of town, where buildings leaned against each other and the smell of unwashed humanity mixed with rotting garbage. The dry goods store was closed and dark, but a narrow staircase led to the second floor. Pete knocked on the door at the top. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Mr. Reed, we need to talk to you about Joseph Blackwood. Silence. Then, faintly, they heard movement inside. Go away, a man's voice called. I don't know anything. Please, Evelyn said. We're not working for Mercer. We're trying to stop him. More silence. Then locks clicked and the door opened a crack. A pale face peered out, young, maybe 25, with frightened eyes and a bruise yellowing on his jaw. You're the people from Iron Mesa Ranch, Reed said. The ones asking about the survey. Yes. How did you know? Because Mercer's people have been watching the surveyor offices all day. They know you're looking. Reed glanced past them into the hallway. You shouldn't be here. If they followed you... Please, Evelyn said. We need to know what Blackwood found. We need proof. Reed hesitated, then opened the door wider. Get inside, quick. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. Papers and maps covered every surface. Reed locked the door behind them and immediately went to the window, checking the street below. Joe, Mr. Blackwood. He was a good man, honest. He didn't deserve what happened. Reed's voice shook. They made it look like a heart attack, but I know better. 2 days before he died, he told me someone had broken into his office. Nothing was taken, but his files had been searched. He was scared. Did he tell you what he'd found at Iron Mesa Ranch? Evelyn asked. He told me it was the biggest discovery of his career. Copper deposits that could be worth millions once the railroad came through. He'd sent his report to Walter Grayson, but he'd kept his field notes. Reed moved to a trunk in the corner, unlocked it, and pulled out a leather-bound journal. These are Joe's observations, every test he ran, every sample he took. It's not as detailed as the full report, but it proves the copper is there. He handed the journal to Evelyn. Her hand shook as she opened it. Pages of careful notations, sketches of the land, chemical analyses. And on the last page, underlined twice, preliminary estimates suggest deposits of sufficient grade and quantity to support large-scale mining operations. Commercial value, substantial. Recommend immediate claim filing and further geological assessment. This was it. This was the proof they needed. Why didn't you come forward? Pete asked. After Blackwood died? Because I want to keep living. Reed's laugh was bitter. The day after Joe died, a man came to see me. Didn't give a name, but I knew who sent him. He said if I kept my mouth shut and forgot everything Joe told me about Iron Mesa Ranch, I'd be fine. If I didn't, I'd end up in a grave next to Joe. He touched the bruise on his jaw. This was just a reminder, last week, making sure I remembered our agreement. We can protect you, Evelyn said. There's a federal marshal. I know about Marshal Webb, everyone knows. And everyone also knows he's one man who can't be everywhere. Mercer's got 20 men who'll do whatever he pays them for. Reed shook his head. I'm sorry. I want to help, but I'm not brave enough to die for it. What if you didn't have to testify? Evelyn thought fast. What if we just took the journal? You could say it was stolen. You tried to stop us, but we overpowered you. Reed stared at her. You'd do that? We need this journal, Mr. Reed. Without it, we have nothing. With it, we can stop Mercer before he hurts anyone else. And if he finds out I gave it to you, he'll kill me anyway. No one has to know you gave it willingly. We forced our way in. We threatened you. You were scared for your life, so you let us take it. Pete moved toward the door. We'll make it convincing. Break the lock on our way out. Knock over some furniture. Anyone asks, you tell them we were desperate and dangerous. Reed looked at the journal in Evelyn's hands, then at his own shaking fingers. Joe believed in what he did. He believed in telling the truth, even when it was inconvenient. His voice steadied. He'd want his work to matter, to mean something. It will, Evelyn promised. We'll make sure of it. Then take it. Get out of here before someone sees you. Reed backed away from them. And when this is over, if you win, tell people Joe Blackwood was a good surveyor. Tell them he died because he wouldn't lie. We will. They staged the break-in quickly. Pete broke the door lock with a hard shove, making sure it would look forced. They knocked over a chair and scattered some papers. Then they ran down the stairs and into the darkening street. Back to Porter's, Pete said. Get our things and get out of town. We ride through the night if we have to. But as they rounded the corner onto Main Street, 3 men stepped out of an alley to block their path. Evelyn recognized one of them from the barn fire, one of Mercer's hired guns. The other 2 she didn't know, but their intentions were clear from the weapons they carried. That's far enough, the leader said. He was a squat man with a broken nose and cold eyes. Mr. Mercer would like a word. Pete's hand moved toward his gun. The 3 men all drew faster. Don't, the leader warned. We're not here to kill you. Not yet. But we will if you make us. What does Mercer want? Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Like I said, a word. Both of you. There's a warehouse 2 blocks south. You come quiet, you leave whole. You make trouble, you don't leave at all. And if we refuse? The leader smiled without warmth. You really think that's an option? They were marched through Cheyenne's evening streets at gunpoint, the few people they passed looking away quickly. No one wanted to get involved. By the time they reached the warehouse, a hulking structure that smelled of old grain and rot, full darkness had fallen. Inside, lamplight created pools of yellow in the vast empty space. And in the center of those pools stood Silas Mercer, looking as comfortable in a warehouse as he would in a palace. Miss Carter? He said pleasantly. Mr. Walker, thank you for joining me. We didn't have much choice, Evelyn said. No, I suppose not. Mercer walked toward them, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. I have to admit, you've been more persistent than I expected. Coming all the way to Cheyenne, asking dangerous questions, bothering respectable surveyors and federal marshals. He smiled. You've made quite an impression. Good. Not really, because now I have to deal with you, and I'd rather not. Mercer stopped a few feet away. So let me be clear about something. Iron Mesa Ranch is mine. It's always been mine. I've spent 2 years setting this up, removing obstacles, arranging finances, making sure that when the ranch finally goes to auction, I'm the only bidder who matters. You mean you've spent 2 years destroying it? Evelyn shot back. Sabotaging equipment, poisoning water sources, killing the man who owned it. Prove it. Mercer's smile widened. Oh, wait. You can't. Because there's no proof. Just accusations from a desperate woman and a washed-up cowboy who thinks he can play hero. We have Blackwood's journal. The smile disappeared. Mercer's eyes went flat and dangerous. Show me. No. Show me, or my men start breaking bones. Starting with yours. Mercer nodded to the gunmen behind them. Your choice. Pete moved to put himself between Evelyn and the men, but she stopped him. She pulled the journal from inside her coat and held it up. This proves the copper deposits exist. It proves Walter knew about them before he died, and it proves you had a motive to kill him. Mercer reached for the journal. Evelyn jerked it back. Not yet. First, you tell me the truth. Did you kill Walter Grayson? Does it matter? Yes. Mercer studied her for a long moment. Then he shrugged. His saddle strap was old. It was easy to weaken it just enough that it would fail under stress. He took that ride alone like he did every week. The rest was gravity and bad luck. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. He should have taken my offer when he had the chance. Rage exploded in Evelyn's chest, hot and consuming. You murdered him. I removed an obstacle. There's a difference. Mercer held out his hand. Now, give me the journal. So you can destroy it? Never. Then you'll die holding it. Your choice. Mercer nodded to his men. Take it from her. The 3 gunmen moved forward. Pete drew his weapon, but one of them was faster, clubbing him across the head with a gun barrel. Pete went down hard. Pete! Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him. Blood was already matting his gray hair. Rough hands grabbed her, hauling her upright. She fought, kicking and clawing, but they were too strong. One of them wrenched the journal from her grip. Thank you, Mercer said, taking it. He flipped through the pages, his expression satisfied. Blackwood always was thorough. Too bad his thoroughness got him killed. He looked at Evelyn. You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Miss Carter. Ordinarily, I'd kill you for that. But I'm told you've spoken with Marshal Webb and that reporter at the Tribune. If you disappear now, they'll ask questions I'd rather not answer. So you're letting us go. I'm giving you a choice. Go back to Iron Mesa Ranch. Pack your things. Leave Wyoming and never come back. Do that, and you live. And if I refuse? Then you'll have an accident, just like Walter, just like Blackwood, just like anyone else foolish enough to stand in my way. Mercer tucked the journal inside his coat. I'll even sweeten the deal. $5,000, cash, enough to start over anywhere you want. All you have to do is disappear. $5,000. It was a fortune, more than Evelyn would see in 5 years, maybe 10, and it was worthless compared to what Mercer had taken from her. No, she said. Mercer's eyes hardened. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. Evelyn straightened despite the hands holding her. You think you've won. You think taking that journal means you're safe, but you're wrong. Because I know the truth now. I know what you did. And I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too. With what proof? I have the journal. Reed won't testify. Blackwood's dead. Mercer smiled again, cold and certain. You have nothing but words, Miss Carter, and words won't save your ranch. Maybe not, but they'll ruin your reputation. And in this territory, reputation is everything. Evelyn pulled free of the hands holding her and walked to where Pete was starting to stir. Come on, let's go. Wait. Mercer's voice stopped her. You really think you can beat me? A woman with no money, no connections, no power? Evelyn looked back at him. I think you're terrified of exactly that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have brought us here. You would have just killed us in the street." She helped Pete to his feet. The old cowboy was bleeding and dazed, but he could walk. Together, they left the warehouse, leaving Mercer and his men standing in the lamplight. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. Pete sagged against a wall, holding his head. "Did we just walk away from Silas Mercer after accusing him of murder?" he mumbled. "Yes." "Are we idiots?" "Probably." Evelyn pressed her hand against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Can you ride?" "Have to. We need to get out of the city before Mercer changes his mind about letting us leave." Pete's eyes focused on her. "We lost the journal." "I know. Without it, we got nothing. We have the truth, and we have each other. That's more than nothing." Evelyn helped him start walking toward Porter's. "Come on, let's go home." They rode out of Cheyenne an hour later, pushing through exhaustion and pain. The night was moonless and cold, but they didn't stop. Behind them, the city's lights faded into darkness, and ahead of them waited Iron Mesa Ranch, where Rhett and the others were fighting a battle they didn't know they'd already lost. They reached Iron Mesa Ranch 3 days later, exhausted and empty-handed, except for the truth no one would believe. Pete's head wound had stopped bleeding, but left him dizzy and pale. Evelyn's hands were raw from the rains, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Rhett met them in the yard before they'd even dismounted. One look at Pete's bandaged head, and his expression went dark. "What happened?" "Mercer," Pete said, sliding off his horse with a grunt. "Jumped us in Cheyenne. Took Blackwood's journal." "Journal?" Evelyn climbed down from Copper, her legs nearly buckling. "It's a long story. Can we talk inside?" They gathered in the kitchen, Rhett, Pete, Danny, and Cole. Evelyn told them everything: Blackwood's death, the journal, Samuel Reed, the confrontation in the warehouse, Mercer's confession that he'd killed Walter. When she finished, silence filled the room like smoke. Cole spoke first. "So we got nothing. No proof, no witness, no way to fight back." "We have the truth," Evelyn said. "Truth doesn't pay debts. Truth doesn't stop the bank from foreclosing." Cole turned to Rhett. "This was a waste of time. We should have been here protecting the ranch instead of chasing ghosts in Cheyenne." "Cole's right," Rhett said quietly. "About the foreclosure, anyway. Bank sent notice while you were gone. We got 2 weeks before they auctioned the property." 2 weeks. Evelyn felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. After everything they'd risked, everything they'd learned, they were out of time. "Then we use those 2 weeks," she said. "We go to Marshall Webb with what we know. We get Henry Caldwell to print the story." "With what evidence?" Rhett's voice was tired. "Mercer has the journal. Reed won't testify. And a confession made at gunpoint that no one else heard isn't going to convince anyone. So we just give up. Let Mercer win. I don't know what else to do." Rhett stood and walked to the window, staring out at the land he'd worked for 6 years. "Maybe we were fooling ourselves thinking we could fight someone like him. Maybe some battles aren't meant to be won." Evelyn wanted to argue, but exhaustion and defeat were pressing down on her too hard. She'd come so close. The journal had been in her hands, proof that could have saved everything. And now it was gone. "I need to sleep," she said. "We can figure out what to do tomorrow." She left before anyone could respond, climbing the stairs to Walter's room. Her room now, she supposed, for whatever time remained. She collapsed onto the bed without undressing and fell into dark, dreamless sleep. She woke to shouting. Evelyn stumbled to the window and saw riders approaching, at least a dozen of them, led by Silas Mercer. Behind them came a wagon carrying what looked like surveying equipment. Her heart sank. This was it. Mercer was making his move. She ran downstairs to find Rhett already outside, the other cowboys gathered behind him. All of them were armed. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Mercer reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch. He looked relaxed, confident. A man who knew he held all the cards. "Maddox, Miss Carter. Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "State your business and leave," Rhett said. His hand hovered near his gun. "My business is simple. I'm here to begin preliminary survey work on the copper deposits beneath this property." Mercer gestured to the wagon. "As the future owner of Iron Mesa Ranch, I want to assess exactly what I'm buying. You don't own it yet. A technicality. In 2 weeks, the bank auctions this land. And I'm the only bidder with the means and motivation to buy it. Mercer's smile widened. Unless you've somehow come up with the $12,000 you owe? No, I didn't think so. Evelyn stepped forward. You can't survey land you don't own. That's trespassing. Actually, I have permission from the bank holding the mortgage. When property goes into foreclosure, certain rights transfer to potential buyers. It's all very legal, I assure you. Mercer pulled out a document and waved it. But please, feel free to check with the bank yourselves. This is wrong, Danny said, his young voice shaking with anger. Walter built this place. He died for it. You can't just... Walter Grayson is dead. His debts are not. Mercer's tone hardened. This is business, boy. Nothing personal. You murdered him, Evelyn said. That's about as personal as it gets. Careful, Miss Carter. Slander is a serious charge. Mercer's eyes glinted with malice. Do you have any proof of this accusation? Any evidence at all? No? Then I suggest you keep your unfounded theories to yourself. Cole's hand moved toward his gun. Rhett caught his wrist, stopping him. Don't. That's what he wants. So we just let him walk all over us? We let him survey, because legally, there's nothing we can do to stop him. Rhett's voice was bitter with defeat. But we watch, and we remember. And when this is over, we make sure everyone knows what kind of man Silas Mercer really is. Mercer laughed. How noble! The defeated cowboy standing on principle while his world crumbles around him. He signaled to his men. Set up the equipment on the north pasture. Let's see what we're really dealing with here. The surveyors began unloading their gear. Mercer's hired guns spread out, watching the cowboys with hands on weapons. The message was clear. Any interference would be met with violence. Evelyn watched it all with a sick feeling in her stomach. This was how it ended. Not with a fight, but with a whimper. With them standing helpless while Mercer claimed everything Walter had built. She was turning to go inside when she noticed something odd. One of Mercer's men, a thin fellow with nervous hands, kept glancing at the main house. Not with hostility, with something else. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. Their eyes met for just a moment before he looked away quickly. Evelyn's mind raced. She'd seen that face before. But where? Then it hit her. The general store in Red Hollow. The day they'd confronted Thomas Marsh about the inflated prices. This man had been there, restocking shelves. He worked for Marsh, which meant he might know things, might have seen things. She caught Rhett's eye and tilted her head toward the house. He understood and followed her inside. What is it? That man. The thin one with the nervous hands. He works at Marsh's store. Evelyn spoke quickly, keeping her voice low. I think he knows something. The way he looked at me. He's scared. Guilty. So maybe he's the weak link. Maybe if we can get him alone, get him talking, he's not going to testify against Mercer any more than anyone else has. Maybe not in court. But if he tells us something, anything, we can use to pressure Marsh. Evelyn grabbed Rhett's arm. We're out of options. This might be our last chance. Rhett looked out the window at the surveyors setting up their equipment, at Mercer standing like a conqueror on land he didn't yet own. All right, how do we get him alone? They waited until early evening when the surveyors packed up for the day. Most of Mercer's men rode back toward Red Hollow, but 3 stayed behind to guard the equipment. The nervous man was one of them. After dark, Evelyn approached the north pasture on foot. She'd changed into her darkest dress and borrowed a shawl that helped her blend into the shadows. Her heart hammered as she got closer to where the men had made camp. 2 of them sat by the fire, talking in low voices. The third, the nervous one, stood apart, smoking a cigarette and staring at nothing. Evelyn moved closer until she was just outside the firelight. Excuse me, she said softly. The nervous man jumped, his hand going to his gun. When he saw it was her, he relaxed slightly but looked around in panic. What are you doing here? If they see us talking, then talk quietly. I just want to ask you something. I can't. I shouldn't even be... He took a drag on his cigarette, his hand shaking. You need to leave. You know what Mercer did, don't you? To Walter Grayson. The man's face went pale in the moonlight. I don't know anything. Yes, you do. I can see it in your face. You were there, or you heard about it, or you helped cover it up. Which is it? Please, If Mercer finds out I talked to you, he won't. I swear it. But I need to know the truth. Walter Grayson was a good man. He deserves justice. The nervous man threw down his cigarette and ground it under his boot. Justice, that's a nice word. Doesn't mean much out here. He glanced back at the fire to make sure the others weren't listening. I worked for Mercer 2 years ago. Did errands, mostly. Delivered messages, that kind of thing. What kind of messages? The kind you don't ask questions about. One night, he sends me to Walter Grayson's barn. Said there was a package I needed to leave. Said it was important I not be seen. The man's voice dropped even lower. When I got there, I saw another man, one of Mercer's regular enforcers, working on something in the tack room. A saddle. Walter's saddle. He was doing something to the strap. Weakening it, I think. I didn't stay to find out. Just left the package and got out of there. What was in the package? Don't know. Never opened it. But 3 days later, Walter Grayson was dead from a fall off his horse, and I knew what I'd seen. The man's voice cracked. I quit working for Mercer after that. Told him I was moving to Laramie, but then things got tight and I needed money, so I ended up working for his brother-in-law instead. Trying to stay far enough away that I don't get pulled into anything else, but close enough that Mercer doesn't think I'm a threat. You could testify to what you saw. I could also end up dead. No thank you. The man started to walk away. Wait, what's your name? He stopped, looked back. Jimmy Parsons. Not that it matters. I'm not testifying to anything. What if you didn't have to? What if there was another way? There isn't. Not against Silas Mercer. Jimmy walked back toward the fire, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the darkness. She returned to the house and told Rhett what she'd learned. He listened with a grim expression. It's not enough. One scared man who refuses to testify isn't going to change anything. But he confirms what we know. Walter was murdered. Mercer ordered it. Evelyn paced the kitchen. There has to be some way to use this. How? We can't force Jimmy to talk. We can't prove Mercer gave the order. And even if we could, the sheriff won't touch it. He's in Mercer's pocket same as everyone else. Evelyn stopped pacing. An idea was forming, dangerous and possibly stupid, but it was all she had. What if we didn't go to the sheriff? What if we went to the people? What people? The ranchers, the townspeople. Everyone who's been too scared to stand up to Mercer because they thought they were alone. Evelyn's voice grew stronger as the plan took shape. We gather them. Tell them what we know. Show them they're not the only ones who've been hurt by Mercer's greed, and then we make enough noise that the federal marshal has to investigate. That's insane. You're talking about starting an uprising. I'm talking about people standing together instead of being picked off one by one. Mercer's power comes from everyone being too frightened to fight back. What happens if they stop being frightened? Rhett stared at her. You really think you can convince people to risk everything on your word? Not my word. Walter's memory. And their own anger. Everyone in this territory has lost something to Mercer. Land, money, dignity, maybe family. They're just waiting for someone to give them permission to fight back. And if you're wrong, if no one shows up or if Mercer retaliates, then we lose. But we're losing anyway. Evelyn met his storm-gray eyes. At least this way, we go down swinging. Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right. How do we spread the word? They worked through the night, writing a simple message and making copies. By dawn, Danny and Pete were riding to neighboring ranches to deliver the message personally. Cole, grudgingly, rode into Red Hollow to post notices in the few places Mercer didn't control. The message was direct. Public gathering at Iron Mesa Ranch Saturday noon. Come hear the truth about Silas Mercer. Bring your neighbors. Bring your anger. It's time to stand together. Saturday was 4 days away. 4 days to hope that people would be brave enough to show up. 4 days for Mercer to hear about it and make his countermove. The countermove came on Friday. Evelyn was in the barn when Cole rode in fast, his horse lathered with sweat. They're coming. Mercer and at least 20 men, armed to the teeth. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. Cole dismounted and checked his gun. This is it, the fight we've been avoiding. Rhett appeared from the house, Pete and Danny behind him. They all looked to Rhett, waiting for orders. We don't shoot first, Rhett said. But we don't back down either. Everyone armed and ready, but weapons down until I say otherwise. Clear?" They nodded and took positions around the yard. Evelyn stood on the porch, her heart racing. This was it. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, coming down to this moment. Mercer arrived with his small army surrounding the ranch house. He dismounted slowly, making a show of his confidence. "Maddox, calling for a gathering tomorrow, I hear. How ambitious!" "People have a right to know the truth." "The truth," Mercer laughed. "The truth is you're finished. The bank forecloses in 1 week. This ranch becomes mine, and all your little gathering will accomplish is getting people hurt." He gestured to his men. "I have enough guns here to make sure no one leaves that meeting alive if necessary." "You'd kill innocent people?" "I'd defend my interests. There's a difference." Mercer's smile faded. "Cancel the gathering, Maddox. Send your people home. Accept that you lost. Do that, and I'll let you walk away with your lives." "No." "No? We're holding the gathering. People will come. They'll hear what you've done, and they'll decide for themselves whether they're willing to keep living under your thumb." Rhett's voice was steady, but Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders. "You can kill us all right now, but that'll just prove everything we've said about you. Or you can leave and take your chances tomorrow with witnesses and daylight." Mercer's jaw clenched. For a moment, Evelyn thought he would give the order to shoot. His men tensed, fingers on triggers. Then hoofbeats sounded from the road. Everyone turned to see riders approaching, 5 of them, led by Marshal Clayton Webb. Mercer's expression flickered with surprise before settling back into confidence. "Marshal, this is quite a surprise." "Mr. Mercer." Webb dismounted, his federal badge catching the light. "Got word there might be trouble out here. Thought I'd make sure everything stays peaceful." "Very thoughtful, but as you can see, everything's fine, just a business discussion between neighbors." "That's not what it looks like to me. Looks like intimidation." Webb's gaze swept over Mercer's armed men. "These men all got legal cause to be on this property? I have permission from the bank to survey during daylight hours, not to surround the main house with armed men after dark." Webb moved to stand beside Rhett. "I think you should head back to town, Mr. Mercer, before this becomes something you can't talk your way out of." Mercer's face darkened. "This isn't federal jurisdiction, Marshal. Land fraud is. So is intimidation of witnesses in a federal investigation. And I'm investigating several claims of improper land acquisition in this territory, claims that mention your name repeatedly." Webb's tone was mild, but his meaning was clear. "So unless you want me to look closer at your business dealings, I suggest you leave these folks alone." For a long moment, no one moved. Evelyn held her breath, watching Mercer calculate his options. Finally, Mercer smiled, cold and promising. "Of course, Marshal. Just being neighborly. Come on, boys. Let's go." He mounted and rode off, his men following. But as he passed the porch, he looked directly at Evelyn. "This isn't over." "I know," she said quietly. After they left, Webb turned to Rhett. "That gathering tomorrow, I'll be attending, along with my deputies, just to make sure things stay civil." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I can keep the peace, but I can't change the fact that the bank's foreclosing. Mercer's right about that much. Your time's running out." Webb climbed back on his horse. "Whatever you're planning to do tomorrow, make it count." Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. By 11, wagons and riders began arriving at Iron Mesa Ranch. Slowly at first, a few neighbors Evelyn recognized from town. Then more and more. By noon, over 100 people crowded the yard. Ranchers who'd lost land to Mercer's schemes. Townspeople who'd been cheated on deals. Families who'd watched their neighbors disappear or die under suspicious circumstances. They came because they were tired of being afraid. And they came because, finally, someone was willing to say out loud what they'd all been thinking in silence. Evelyn stood on the porch, looking at the sea of faces, and felt her knees go weak. Rhett stood beside her, solid and steady. "You ready?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She stepped forward, and the crowd quieted. "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy. I know some of you are scared. I'm scared too." Evelyn's voice shook at first, then strengthened. "My name is Evelyn Carter. 2 months ago, I came to Wyoming to marry Walter Grayson, but Walter died 3 days before I arrived. And in the weeks since, I've learned that his death wasn't an accident, it was murder. A murmur ran through the crowd. Walter Grayson discovered copper deposits beneath this land, deposits worth a fortune. And Silas Mercer found out. He tried to buy the ranch, but Walter refused to sell, so Mercer destroyed it piece by piece, sabotaging equipment, poisoning water, bleeding the ranch dry with illegal loans. And when that wasn't enough, he had Walter killed. "Can you prove it?" someone shouted. Someone. "I have testimony from a man who saw Mercer's enforcer tampering with Walter's saddle. I have documents showing systematic financial manipulation. I have evidence that the surveyor who discovered the copper was murdered and his report stolen." Evelyn's voice rang out across the yard. "What I don't have is a legal system brave enough to prosecute Silas Mercer, because he owns the sheriff, the judge, and half the officials in 3 counties. So what are we supposed to do?" another voice called. "He's too powerful." "He's powerful because we let him be, because we stand alone instead of together, because we're too frightened to fight back." Evelyn looked out at the crowd. "But I've learned something these past weeks. Power isn't about money or guns or how many officials you've bought. Real power comes from people refusing to accept injustice, from people saying enough and meaning it." "Pretty words," Cole muttered from beside her. "But words don't—" "I'm not finished," Evelyn cut him off. She turned back to the crowd. "In 1 week, the bank auctions this ranch. Silas Mercer expects to be the only bidder. He expects to walk away with everything Walter built, everything that's buried beneath this land. And he expects us to stand by and let it happen. We don't have the money to outbid him," an older rancher said. "Maybe not individually, but together?" Evelyn pulled out a paper she'd worked on all week. Calculations, projections, possibilities. "I've done the numbers. If every person here contributes what they can, $10, $50, $100, we can raise enough to compete at auction. Maybe not enough to win outright, but enough to drive the price so high that Mercer bleeds money. Enough to make this fight cost him everything." "Why would we give you our money?" someone demanded. "How do we know you won't just take it and run?" "You don't. You have to trust me. Same way I'm trusting all of you by standing here today." Evelyn's voice softened. "I'm not asking you to save this ranch for me. I'm asking you to save it for yourselves. Because if we let Mercer win here, he'll come for your land next. Your business. Your livelihood. He won't stop until he owns everything." Marshall Webb stepped forward. "She's right. I've been investigating Mercer's dealings for months. He's used the same pattern in a dozen counties. Identify valuable land, destroy the owner through debt and sabotage, buy it cheap at auction, then sell it for massive profit. It's fraud on a territorial scale." "Then arrest him," someone shouted. "I'm working on it, but I need time to build a case that'll stick, and I need witnesses willing to testify." Webb looked around at the crowd. "That's where you come in. Each of you knows something, saw something, heard something. Individually, it's not enough. But together, we can build a case that even Mercer can't buy his way out of." A middle-aged woman pushed forward. "My husband died in a mining accident 3 years ago. Everyone said it was just bad luck, but the mine inspector had warned the owner, one of Mercer's companies, that the supports were unsafe. They didn't fix them because it was cheaper to let men die." Her voice cracked. "I never said anything because I was afraid, but I'm done being afraid. My water source was poisoned last summer," another rancher said. "Lost half my herd. The sheriff said it was natural causes, but I found evidence someone had dumped something upstream. I kept quiet because I didn't think anyone would believe me." One by one, people started sharing their stories. Decades of abuse and intimidation spilling out into the open. And with each story, Evelyn saw the crowd change. From frightened individuals into something larger, something powerful, something Mercer should have feared all along. By mid-afternoon, they'd collected over $8,000. Not enough to guarantee winning the auction, but enough to make Mercer fight for it. More importantly, they'd collected testimony from 43 people willing to go on record about Mercer's crimes. Marshall Webb promised to return to Cheyenne and begin building his case immediately. Henry Caldwell, who'd ridden out from town when he heard about the gathering, promised a front-page story that would run in every paper in the territory. As the crowd dispersed, people approached Evelyn one by one, thanking her, telling her she was brave, promising to stand with her no matter what came next. When everyone had finally left and the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Evelyn collapsed onto the porch steps. Her whole body was shaking with exhaustion and relief and the weight of what they'd just done. Rhett sat down beside her. You did it. We did it. No, that was you. He looked at her, something warm and wondering in his storm gray eyes. You came here with nothing. No money, no connections, no reason to stay. And you turned everything around. I haven't turned anything around yet. The auction's still happening. We might still lose. Maybe. But we're not going down quiet. That counts for something. Rhett's hand found hers, rough and warm. Whatever happens, Evelyn, I'm glad you stayed. She looked at him. This man who'd brought her bread on the worst day of her life, who'd protected her and doubted her, and ultimately believed in her, who'd become something she hadn't expected to find in this brutal place. I'm glad too, she said quietly. The auction was held 5 days later in the Red Hollow courthouse. The room was packed, not just with bidders, but with witnesses. People who'd come to watch justice, or at least to watch a good fight. Silas Mercer sat in the front row, confident and composed. He'd brought lawyers and accountants. He'd probably already decided where to put the mining equipment. Evelyn sat across the aisle with Rhett, Pete, and Marshall Webb. Her hands were clamped together to stop them from shaking. The auctioneer called the proceedings to order. Iron Mesa Ranch, 1,000 acres with improvements, mineral rights included. We'll start the bidding at $5,000. 5,000, Mercer said immediately. 6,000, Evelyn countered. Mercer glanced back at her, his expression flickering with surprise before settling into amusement. 7,000. 8,000. The bidding continued, climbing higher. 9,000. 10. 11. Each time Mercer bid, Evelyn matched him. The money they'd collected was running out, but she wasn't backing down. At 13,000, Mercer's smile finally faded. This was costing him more than he'd planned. 14,000, he said, his voice tight. Evelyn looked at the remaining funds. They had enough for one more bid. Maybe. 15,000. Mercer's jaw clenched. He turned and spoke rapidly to one of his lawyers. The lawyer shook his head. 16,000, Mercer said. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. They were out of money. She'd pushed as hard as she could, but it wasn't enough. Then a voice from the back of the room. 20,000. Everyone turned. A well-dressed man in his 50s stood near the door, someone Evelyn didn't recognize. I'm sorry, the auctioneer said. You are? Charles Whitmore, representing the Wyoming Mineral Development Company. We've been following the reports of copper deposits in this area with great interest. Whitmore walked forward, placing a bank draft on the auctioneer's table. $20,000. Cash. Mercer shot to his feet. This is irregular. The auction was supposed to be open to any qualified bidder, the auctioneer finished, which Mr. Whitmore clearly is. Do you wish to counter his bid, Mr. Mercer? Mercer's face had gone pale. 20,000 was more than even he wanted to spend on a gamble, especially with a federal investigation looming. If he bid higher and lost, he'd be financially exposed. If he backed down, he lost the land. The silence stretched. Going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. 25,000, Mercer said through gritted teeth. Whitmore smiled. 30,000. 35. 40. The room erupted in whispers. This was unprecedented. Two wealthy men fighting over a failing ranch that most people wouldn't have paid 5,000 for. Mercer stood there, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. He'd built his empire by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what desperate people could accomplish when they stopped being afraid. Going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. Sold. To Mr. Whitmore for $40,000. The room exploded into cheers and shouts. Mercer stormed out, his lawyers scrambling after him. Evelyn sat frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. They'd lost the auction, but Mercer had lost it too. Some stranger now owned Iron Mesa Ranch. Whitmore approached them after the crowd cleared. Miss Carter, Mr. Maddox, I wonder if we could speak privately. They followed him outside, where a well-appointed carriage waited. Whitmore pulled out a folder of documents. Let me be direct. I represent a consortium of investors interested in developing the copper deposits on Iron Mesa Ranch. We've reviewed the survey reports, the real ones, not the stolen journal, and we believe the deposits are even larger than initially estimated. He handed Rhett the folder. We'd like to offer you a partnership, The ranch remains yours to operate as you see fit. We handle the mining operations and split the profit 60-40. 60-40 in whose favor? Rhett asked. Yours, of course. It's your land. We're just providing capital and expertise. Whitmore smiled. We've been watching Silas Mercer's operations for some time. When we heard about this auction, we saw an opportunity to both acquire a valuable asset and deny it to a man who's been a thorn in our side for years. Evelyn's head was spinning. Why would you give us such generous terms? Because we're not in the land business. We're in the mining business. And we'd rather partner with honest ranchers than deal with Mercer's inevitable lawsuits and complications. Whitmore pulled out another document. This is a contract. Take it to a lawyer. I recommend someone in Cheyenne, not here. Review it carefully. If you're interested, we can proceed. If not, we'll operate the mine ourselves and you'll receive fair market rate for the extracted minerals. He tipped his hat and climbed into his carriage, leaving them standing in the street with documents that promised to change everything. Rhett looked at Evelyn. Did that really just happen? I think so. She started laughing, exhausted, relieved, almost hysterical laughter. I think we just won. The contract was legitimate. The lawyer in Cheyenne confirmed it. Within a month, mining operations began on the northern section of Iron Mesa Ranch. Within 3 months, the first copper was extracted and sold for more money than Walter had made in 12 years of ranching. Silas Mercer was indicted on 14 counts of fraud, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and 17 counts of illegal intimidation. Marshall Webb's investigation, fueled by the testimony from the gathering, had built a case even Mercer's lawyers couldn't dismiss. He'd spend the next 10 years in prison, his empire dismantled and sold off piece by piece. Thomas Marsh, granted immunity for his testimony against Mercer, closed his store and moved to Denver. Jimmy Parsons, who finally found the courage to testify about what he'd seen in Walter's barn, used the reward money to buy a small farm in Montana. Henry Caldwell won awards for his reporting on the Mercer case. His series on corruption in Wyoming territory led to reforms that made it harder for men like Mercer to operate in the shadows. And Iron Mesa Ranch thrived. With the mining profits, they rebuilt the barn properly, bought new equipment, expanded the herd, hired more cowboys. The ranch that had been slowly dying became one of the most successful operations in the territory. But the real change wasn't in the buildings or the bank account. It was in the people. One evening, nearly a year after the auction, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. The land that had seemed so brutal and unforgiving when she'd first arrived now felt like home. Rhett came out to stand beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He'd taken to making it most evenings, strong and bitter, the way she'd learned to like it. Copper's still running rich, he said. Whitmore thinks we got at least 20 more years of profitable mining. That's good? Yeah. Rhett was quiet for a moment. You know what's strange? All that money, all that success. Sometimes I think about Walter and wonder if he'd be happy with how it turned out. Why wouldn't he be? Because he never cared much about being rich. He just wanted to build something decent, something that mattered. Rhett looked down at his coffee, and then he died before he could see what it became. He saw enough. Evelyn set down her cup and turned to face Rhett. He saw that this land was worth fighting for, that it could support something bigger than just one man's dream. And he chose me to continue that fight, even though he never met me. Best decision he ever made, Rhett said quietly. Second best? Evelyn corrected. The best was hiring you. They stood close together, not quite touching, the air between them charged with things unsaid. Over the past year, they'd built something neither had expected. Not just a partnership, but something deeper. Something that grew slowly, carefully, in the spaces between work and worry. Evelyn, Rhett started, then stopped. Tried again. When you first got here, I thought you'd last maybe a week. Figured you'd realize how hard this life was and run back to wherever you came from. I almost did. That first night I lay in bed thinking I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. What changed your mind? You. The bread you brought me. That small kindness when you could have just told me to get back on the train. Evelyn smiled. You showed me that even in the hardest places there are people worth knowing, worth fighting for. Rhett set down his coffee and took her hands in his. His palms were still rough, still scarred from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. I'm not good with words, never have been. But I need you to know, he stopped, struggling. You're the bravest person I've ever met, and the stubbornness that drove me crazy at the beginning, that's the same stubborn that saved this ranch, saved all of us. Rhett. I'm not finished. He smiled and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. Walter wanted to marry you because he needed help. But if he'd lived, if he'd gotten to know you the way I have, he would have wanted to marry you for entirely different reasons. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. What reasons? Because you make people believe things can get better. Because you don't give up even when you should. Because you see the good in broken people and broken places and somehow convince them to be whole again. Rhett's voice dropped. And because anyone lucky enough to stand beside you gets to be part of something bigger than themselves. Is this a proposal? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure I'm doing this right. Rhett laughed, nervous and honest. I've been trying to figure out how to ask you for 3 months, but every time I get close, I think about everything you've accomplished, and I wonder why you'd settle for a cowboy with a bad past and not much to offer except work and loyalty. Rhett Maddox, are you really that much of an idiot? He blinked. What? You think I stayed for the ranch? For the money? For the mining rights? Evelyn pulled him closer. I stayed because the first morning here, when I could barely get on a horse, and you had every reason to send me away, you taught me how to survive instead. I stayed because when Mercer threatened us, you stood between me and his guns without hesitation. I stayed because you're the kind of man who bakes bread with his own hands and refuses to let good people get crushed by bad ones. So is that a yes? It's a, you better actually ask me properly or I'm going to shake you. Rhett grinned, wide and genuine and beautiful. Then he dropped to one knee on the porch Walter had built, on the land they'd fought for together. Evelyn Carter, will you marry me? Will you keep saving my life on a daily basis and making me better than I thought I could be? Will you build a future with me on this crazy piece of Wyoming that somehow became home? Yes, she said, pulling him back to his feet. Yes to all of it. He kissed her as the sun finished setting, painting the world in fire and shadow. And in that moment, Evelyn understood something fundamental about the frontier, about life, about what it meant to build something worth keeping. The hardest places broke you down to your bones. They stripped away everything comfortable and easy until all that remained was your choice. Surrender or fight. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very stubborn and willing to risk everything, fighting led you to something you never expected. Not just survival, not just success, but home. Real home. The kind built on trust and work and the absolute certainty that the person standing beside you would never let you fall. They were married 6 weeks later in a ceremony attended by everyone who'd stood with them at the gathering. Marshall Webb came from Cheyenne. Henry Caldwell wrote about it in the Tribune. Even Charles Whitmore sent a telegram of congratulations. Danny cried. Pete pretended he had dust in his eyes. Cole, his hostility finally abandoned, played fiddle at the reception with surprising skill. And late that night, when the guests had gone and the ranch settled into quiet, Rhett carried Evelyn over the threshold of the house Walter had built. Their house now. The beginning of something neither had planned, but both had earned. You know what tomorrow brings? Rhett asked, setting her down gently. What? Broken fence on the east pasture. Cattle need moving to better grass. And Whitmore's people want to expand the mining operation, which means more negotiations. Sounds exhausting. It will be. Rhett pulled her close. But we'll do it together, same way we do everything. Together, Evelyn agreed. And the next morning, when dawn broke cold and clear over Iron Mesa Ranch, they rose to meet it, not as the bride who arrived too late and the cowboy who'd lost everything, but as partners who'd learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from never falling, but from choosing, again and again, to stand back up. The land that had tried to break them became the foundation they built on. The grief that had brought them together transformed into strength. And the ranch that almost died became a testament to a simple truth, that ordinary people, when pushed hard enough and given something worth fighting for, could accomplish the extraordinary. Not because they were perfect, not because the path was easy, but because they refused to surrender to the wilderness, to the cruel men who thought power was all that mattered, to the voice that said some battles couldn't be won, They'd proven that voice wrong. And every year afterward, on the anniversary of Evelyn's arrival, Rhett still baked bread with his own hands. Not as a memory of loss, but as a reminder that even in the hardest moments, small kindnesses could change everything. That broken strangers could become family. That love built slowly and tested by fire was the kind that lasted. That in the end, home wasn't a place you were born into. It was something you fought for, brick by brick, day by day, with people stubborn enough to believe in impossible things. Like a city woman surviving the frontier. Like a cowboy with a dark past finding redemption. Like a dying ranch becoming a legend. Like love growing in dust and fire until it was strong enough to last forever.